There it works.
No, we have a few hours today to hit some of the more administrative bureaus. The auditor excluded from that, but the city attorney, government relations, OMF, and the city budget office after the auditor.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, community advisors, and city staff. I am Mary Hall Caballero. I'm pleased to be here today to present my first budget as city auditor. Joining me are Chief Deputy Auditor Sarah Landis and Jennifer McGuirk, who volunteered on our Budget Advisory Committee. I'd also like to acknowledge Brian Wilson, who is here today and has been a longtime member of our committee. My budget request maintains the status quo with one exception. I'm asking for a small additional sum to begin addressing the consequences of a funding policy that prevents people of modest means from exercising their right to appeal a city action taken against them. The Administrative Hearings Office was set up to act on council's behalf and is located in the auditor's office to ensure its independence. In some cases, it effectively is off limits for those who can't afford the price of admission. By approving this one-time request, you can remove a barrier to justice and lay the groundwork for a permanent solution. Sarah will take over from here to walk you through our budget request, and Jennifer will say a few words on behalf of the Budget Advisory Committee when Sarah's finished.
Good morning. I think we got our technical difficulties worked out with the PowerPoint. So as Mary mentioned, we are presenting a stability budget. So we are not proposing any program or service level changes this year or next year. The auditor's office has an overall budget of $39.5 million. 75% of that amount is in assessment-related funds and supports activities in those funds. These funds support the financing of other bureaus' activities, such as code enforcement liens, system development charges, local improvement projects such as streetcar, sewer upgrades, street improvements, and sidewalk repairs. These financing programs are not supported by general fund and are not part of our operating budget. So I'm going to be concentrating on the other 25%, or $9.8 million, which supports the general operations of the auditor's office. We have 8 programs in our bureau and about 50 FTE. The services we provide include performance audits, civilian oversight of police, complaint investigation and resolution, appeals hearings, managing the council agenda and documents, management of city archives and records, liens, assessments, foreclosures, disbursement of payments, maintenance of city code and policy documents, and elections. It's a broad and diverse array of responsibilities for those 50 FTE. Our main cost drivers are personnel, and we also have a substantial debt service in our $9.8 million for archives and record center. And we manage the external audit contract with Moss Adams that conducts the independent financial audit for the city. Okay, on the next slide, this is referring to our operating revenues only. We're primarily funded through the general fund as an overhead bureau with some exceptions. The assessment program is funded solely through the local improvement district fund, and that's about $717,000. PDC also pays for some hours of performance audit time for reviewing that function. That's about $88,000. And the hearings office provides hearings and decisions based on city code and matters that council has given it jurisdiction. Provides code enforcement, code appeal, exclusion appeal, and tow appeal hearings for city bureaus. Conducts certain land use hearings, and hears cases for some other jurisdictions for a fee. The primary sources of revenue for the hearings office are charges to applicants for land use appeals, TriMet for exclusion hearings that we hear on their behalf, and interagency agreements with bureaus for tow hearings, exclusions, code enforcement, and code appeals. So the only decision package that we have submitted deals with the hearings office and the effects of its cost recovery. It's an effort to begin solving the equity concerns that have come to light through complaints brought to the Ombudsman's Office, which is part of the Auditor's Office. And it's part of a larger effort from the Auditor's Office to address barriers to appeals processes. We have an opportunity with this decision package to make progress towards the auditor's goal of addressing equity and access to justice, and the package aligns well with the budget priority for equity and opportunity. Over time, we've learned that our practice of recovering costs for conducting hearings from bureaus that have an appeals process through the hearings office has had some unintended consequences. Some bureaus pass along some or all of this charge to the parties wishing to appeal. For next year, that amount is set to be $1,368. This is cost prohibitive for many, if not most, of those in our community who wish to have a neutral hearing on a city decision. It is especially so for those who are low income and when the appeal fee is more than the cost being appealed. Additionally, the practice is out of alignment with how other jurisdictions fund their appeals offices. It is also out of alignment with stated city financial policy for each of these criteria, including providing benefits citywide, any bureau that council establishes as having an appeals route through the hearings office. General fund provides some support of the hearings office. It is very difficult to determine appropriate costs as hearing length and complexity varies significantly, and it's very difficult to accurately predict workload from year to year. Oops. So the details of the request are that we eliminate for 1 year the interagency agreements with 6 bureaus for code and appeal hearings. That total is just over $56,000. This is a one-time request and will allow us time to study the impact of the change and proposed legislative changes, which will be coming to you next month. If those legislative changes are successful, they may have an impact on workload that we can't predict at this time. It will help us work towards a stable funding model for the hearings office. It will help us come into compliance with city financial policy, and it will provide us with an opportunity to work on our required fee study for next year. So that is the end of my presentation, and I believe Jennifer would like to say a few words regarding our back process.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer McGuirk. I was a citizen member of the Auditor's Office's Budget Advisory Committee for its fiscal year 2015-2016 requested budget. We met from November 2014 through January of this year to discuss the budget request and provide feedback on it. The focus of our meetings quickly became the hearing office code enforcement and appeal issue. The BAC unanimously agrees that the fees represent inequitable service delivery and are barriers to access a fair process. Further, the hearings office structure and internal charges appear to result in a cost to the public that is unparalleled in other municipalities. We heard about a range of options to address these concerns, and we agreed that using general funding to supplant the fees in the coming year gives the office the flexibility to study a longer-term solution while providing relief to potential appellants in the short term. The Budget Advisory Committee strongly supports this request and believes it will ensure the auditor's independent hearings office is accessible to everyone, regardless of income. Thank you for your time.
So can I get you to walk us through the decision package a little more? And that is, so under this proposal, what happens to fee levels?
So this proposal would eliminate the interagency agreements that we have with 6 bureaus that currently are projecting appeals next year.
Right.
And so we would no longer charge those bureaus for the appeals, for the hearings.
Right.
Those bureaus then would be asked to not pass those costs on to appellants.
So does that mean fee levels would drop to half of what they were, or zero?
Zero.
So they're all going to be zero under this approach? I'm trying to
The
understand mechanically how it works. So
Sure, and the legislative proposal that we would be bringing next month will propose a ceiling on a minimum fee to charge to appellants to discourage frivolous appeals, but that is set low enough that it wouldn't be a burden to the majority of folks who wish to make an appeal, and would also include the right to ask for a waiver of that fee.
And so, I don't know if you've given us a list or not of, maybe you haven't, the kinds of fees involved.
They're all 13. There's a standard fee.
All code hearings, all code hearing
this is-
officer appeals are the same fee level? I just didn't know.
So tow and exclusion hearings are different, but those costs are not passed on to appellants. So that's a lower cost. Those hearings are much
So
quicker.
this is park exclusions, what else?
This is just code appeals. It doesn't include any exclusions or tow hearings.
Okay, so which code appeals hearings? Building Code Board of Appeals, what else?
Anything that comes through BDS, anything
Well, everything except land use appeals.
except
So
land
not-
use appeals.
Not
correct.
landmarks, not,
Maybe it'd be helpful if you just started with what are the 6 bureaus that are
Yeah.
impacted?
Environmental services, water, BDS, parks, ONI, and fire, I believe, are the
Right.
ones we have for next
So
year.
with BES and water, is the typical appeal someone who disagrees with their bill or disagrees with a charge of some kind? Or disagrees with some administrative action taken by one of the bureaus?
Yes.
Oh,
I'm
oh,
not sure I
that's
know
right.
what the typical hearing is or the typical appeal is, but it's usually something of that nature. There's been an administrative decision. That person has gone through the administrative appeals process within that bureau, if there is one, and then is taking it to the next step, which is the appeals hearings office.
People who disagree with picking up the stormwater fee, that goes to a hearing, and that would be covered by this.
But
Yes.
presumably, it's also decisions by staff on development as to what size pipe needs to go in or whatever, right? That would go, that's a code issue.
I feel like I should get the hearings officer up here so that he might be able to answer those questions a little better.
I think that the mayor's question, though, is how did you decide on 41 as the right level? Because a concern that I have, we had a discussion about demolitions, and we were estimating that 20% of those would get appealed, even if it's just neighborhood associations being allowed to appeal with a waiver, and that was going to be 92,000. So I'm just wondering, and especially if we get a lot more appeals without the barrier, which I totally appreciate and I agree with removing the barrier, I'm just trying to figure out how to set that appropriate level.
Right. Every year during the budget process, we work with the finance staff in the bureaus that have appeals processes through the hearings officer and that are anticipating having appeals, and they give us an estimate of what they're expecting, and that's the number we use.
so maybe our hearings officer can walk us through some examples.
Good morning. My name is Greg Frank. I am the Code Hearings Officer for the City of Portland. Let me just use one example, Commissioner Fritz, because the Bureau of Development Services is a good example, and it's one that I think all of us can look at. Back 3 or 4 years, we used to get a lot of nuisance appeals, people whose trees grew over the sidewalks. Sidewalks were an issue, but nuisance appeal, the grass is too tall, and usually these involved somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $300, $400 was what was in dispute. Since the Bureau, rightfully so, it's from a cost recovery perspective, asked that they recover those fees, we have not received one. And so the classic example, I think, or the easiest one from our experience, is the nuisance appeals, where now somebody pays $1,300 and bets that they're going to win $200 back. And so that's where the issue comes in. Those aren't the only ones, but there's a number of them that would involve folks with lesser means, perhaps, than the home ownership. But those typically come out of the Water Bureau, the Bureau of Environmental Services, the Revenue Bureau, and those sorts of things.
What kind of fire and rescue bureau type of appeals are we talking about?
I used to hear a lot of Fire Bureau appeals. An inspector would go into a building, come back with violations, whether or not they be escape routes or too many people in an event. I have not seen a Fire Bureau appeal in my recollection in at least 4 or 5 years.
You suppose that is? Is that the cost barrier? Is that?
I can't answer that honestly. I can speculate.
Yeah,
but,
please, speculate.
And the pure speculation is that when somebody looks at a $1,368 fee to test whether or not they're going to get their amount back or they're going to get this back, they're simply acquiescing into saying, no, I'm not going to file that appeal. But that's just speculation. I don't know that as fact.
You know, it's interesting, Mayor. We're having the genesis of this is the auditor saying that she thinks there are some barriers preventing people from exercising an administrative right. And what's interesting about this discussion is each of us that have bureaus that have skin in the game are unclear about what are some of the administrative matters. And we're actually leading the bureau, so God help the public. And now you're speculating, sir, that a $1,300 fee might be an impediment. I think we would all stipulate that that's probably a significant barrier. So I think you've done a good job framing the question, which is, does the current system discourage people that otherwise have a valid claim from exercising a right? And I think that's what you're getting us to look at. And then the question is, if so, what's a reasonable response to that? And I think one of the things that would be helpful coming out of this hearing is a little more detail about the kinds of appeals that would be covered by this, and some more information about why you believe the existing fee schedule is a barrier. Because I think those are the 2 points that you're
I think we could really use those scenarios. And again, some of these appeals are affected by this proposal, it sounds like, and some aren't. But I'm cited with a park exclusion. I want to appeal that. What does it cost me? How do I file? I've been cited for a fire code violation, and it's going to cost me $10,000 to rebuild my exit way, and I disagree with the fire marshal that that's necessary in my building. I want to appeal that. What's it going to cost me? So I think it would be helpful to me, at least, as somebody who's sort of getting refamiliarized with the multiple appeals processes that we have, if we could just see kind of a list in some scenarios of how it works now and how you think it will work under this basically pilot project approach that you're recommending in this decision package, right?
Right, and I'd also like to just point out that we're coming before you on April the 22nd with some legislative proposals that address some of these things, and we have all of the information that you're asking for, and we can brief you before then.
Yeah. It might, Gail just walked in, it might be a good idea, if you haven't already done so, to spend some time with council chiefs of staff, because again, we've all got administrative responsibility over our portfolios of bureaus and have more or less, I'll stipulate to mine being less, working knowledge of what those appeals processes and costs are now in my portfolio of bureaus. But I think it would be helpful as a refresher. Fortunately, Greg has actually been around these issues for a while as a resource, so that's good.
And I'd also like to point out that there are also more things potentially coming to the hearings office, like the ban the box proposal that you're considering that will, so there are decisions that are made in this room that have a direct effect on the appeals that are going before Greg, and half the bureaus have them, and so we can give you that information, which I think.
Well, and one that just came to mind as you were just describing this, I'm not sure if it's even covered by this proposal, is noise appeals, which we haven't seen any of in a long time, and all of a sudden we're seeing a rash of. So if noise appeals become free, I will predict that the council will be even busier with noise appeals than we've been over the last couple of months, in which we've heard 3 of them. So I don't know if they're affected by this or not, but.
There's already no charge for a noise appeal.
Okay, no wonder we're seeing it.
So I just wanted to ask, none of the 6 bureaus in question have any waiver now for this?
Some of the bureaus charge less than the full cost recovery.
So they subsidize the cost within the bureau.
Right.
Okay. And so it seems to me like if you're means testing on your charging, i.e., so you have a sliding scale with a waiver or something like that, and based on that, it is dependent on the appealer's ability to pay, then you don't necessarily need to get rid of the fee because you're already sort of building in a structure through which you make the fee, you eliminate the barrier aspect of the fee, right? I mean, so there are two sort of separate things. If you're completely waiving the fee, which is what this proposal is, then you do. I mean, other than the nuisance charge, which you're saying that the bureaus would be advised to set to just keep people from filing these willy-nilly. But I'm saying, if this is the real cost, then you can have this cost be there as long as you have a mechanism through which people can have a sort of a means-tested way of not paying it if they can't afford to eliminate the barrier. So there may be, we may be going sort of too far saying, let's just get rid of this because this is the cost. If at the same time you have a mechanism through which there's a way for people to not feel like it's a barrier if it really isn't.
I disagree with that a little bit because in the examples given, even if you could afford to pay $1,300, you're not going to if you're appealing a $200 fee. And it's an important accountability and consistency measure for staff. I mean, there needs to be somebody neutral checking to make sure did we interpret the code the way that it's supposed to be interpreted.
The other thing that I would add to that is that we couldn't find any other jurisdictions that charge anywhere close to what we're charging. Most have a fee set around $25 to $50, and even the Supreme Court is a fraction. Appealing to the Supreme Court is a fraction of what it costs to appeal to Greg.
Well, okay then.
But it begs the question of whether we could deliver an appeal process whose cost was in line with the economic consequences of the decision.
And I think we're talking about consistency here at the very minimum. And actually, the Ombudsman and I have met with the staff of each of the council offices, so we've had some of this conversation. And you're right. I mean, I can appeal to the state Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court for less than it's going to cost me to go to BDS. And having been a hearing officer for a number of years in another city, I know there are other models. But the idea that it's essentially due process based on your checking account is clearly an equity issue. And I think that we will never know the chilling effect that it has on people who want to appeal because we don't know. And we will never know who doesn't appeal based on the cost of this. And this is a stopgap measure as they come back in the next 30 days with a fuller process of answering the question. A sliding scale is always based on who's reviewing, which can be problematic. And so, I mean, I think there is clearly an issue and it needs to be addressed as a citywide answer. Not necessarily one bureau at a time, but it's a citywide issue.
Can I follow up on those thoughtful comments? Because I should know the answer to this, Sarah, because you've briefed us. But I think just with the passage of time, and since you've got our attention, maybe I'll ask the dumb question. Is the fee structure that is currently in place designed around cost recovery?
It is, and it's only about 75% cost recovery. Because we recognize that there was a real issue with charging that full amount. But it's based on a model of a cost pool and how much time a typical hearing takes and all of the sunk costs of providing that hearing, staffing and facilities, et cetera.
Does the cost pool have the effect of raising the cost for someone that has a routine matter because of the cost of some of the more complex matters is so much greater? Does it end up making the small code issue more expensive because of what's added into the pool?
I think surely it must, because an easy code case might take a couple of hours. That's certainly not going to cost $1,300. But a more complicated code case may take many hours of hearings and many hours of decision writing. And yeah.
And the other question I had, and again, I'm sorry for my ignorance on this. If you prevail in one of these appeals, do you get your cost back?
Not always.
because that's another thing that in the legal system, it is not unusual to get an award of your damages plus your costs and as compensation. So I think the issue you're raising is really important, and I think it sounds like there's 2 or 3 ways of getting there. And your idea is, your proposal is that we go essentially cold turkey for a year, or for a period of time, to see what impact does that have on the system.
Right.
You want to sort of do a trial run.
Right.
And the worst case scenario would be that it generates a lot of frivolous appeals that create costs and burdens on our administrative staff that is unforeseen.
Right. Although we have some data from tow and exclusion hearings that the Ombudsman has put together, and those are appeals processes that have no fee, that have no interim administrative appeal process, and are very clearly noticed. So people are provided with their right of appeal, with notice of their right of appeal, and that appeal rate is under 2%. So if we are talking about code appeals that are maybe not as well noticed, that do have an interim administrative appeal step, and are far fewer in number than tow and exclusion appeals, we're not thinking that the numbers are going to be huge. But we don't know that, and that's why we're not putting forward a package that asks for 2 new hearings officers. We may not need 2 new hearings officers. We may only need 1, or we may need a clerk and a hearings officer, but we can't assess the impact on workload until we've given it a shot.
I had one more quick follow-up. Could you ballpark for us what percentage of the appeals come from individuals versus corporations? Because we're giving corporations a break for these appeals too, and I'm just wondering if there's going to be a lot of that.
I don't think I can answer that. But I would say it depends on the appeal type. If we go to the Water Bureau, for example, the only Water Bureau cases we've had tend to be involving individuals. If I go to the Bureau of Environmental Services, we recently had a case that involved potentially multi-million dollars, and it had the United States government as one of the entities. We often use the analogy in our office, we're not like a buffet. We don't go up and pick what we want. We're given what we hear by council, and we follow the council's mandate in the code. We are basically going to the banquet, and the banquet is serving us whatever we happen to get at that particular banquet. And so we don't have a neat and tidy way of keeping track of who's who. And even if we did, would we keep track of somebody above $1 million or less than $1 million? Do we ask net worth? It's a slippery slope, in my opinion, when we start trying to determine who's involved, although I understand how important it is to council. My perception and what we're trying to get across is that there appears to be a disparity in the access for low-income folks in some types of appeals as compared to folks that, corporations, for example, that may have greater resources.
Well, in fact, you've just made an eloquent point, though, because if the cost recovery is based on looking at the pool, and you hear the equivalent of the IBM antitrust case and the exclusion case, they're so fundamentally different. And the BES case you noted, I'm unfortunately very familiar with, and that's like the antitrust case involving IBM, and as compared to appeal of an exclusion order. And if we're building a cost recovery model off the pool of costs and then trying to allocate it, we may end up really skewing at the bottom end the costs, and at the high end, there's no barrier for the government to write the check. I mean, you could actually, in that case, I wish it had been higher, but anyway, so I think you framed the issue well.
I just wanted to comment that I think that this is the kind of issue where we'll never know what the long-term impact will be of any policy we pick, and we can experiment, and we might find that we need to put more barriers if we find a flood of appeals at a particular issue. Like an example that occurs to me is in most states of the union that are initiative states, you can file a ballot measure and get a ballot title at virtually no cost. But only in Oregon did we have the advent of Bill Sizemore and others who realized, hey, I can file dozens and dozens of ballot measures and only pursue the ones where I get the right ballot title. So ultimately, the legislature responded by having a requirement of 1,000 signatures before you started that process. But in most states, they haven't done that because they haven't seen the kind of reaction. So I think it might be reasonable to say that we will establish a pretty low threshold because we don't want to limit access. But then if it turns out later on that leads to an unsustainable flood of appeals, then we react to it.
And Commissioner, I would agree with that. And I would also like to point out that Commissioner Fish, that's the exact reason why we think the cost recovery model is not appropriate for this type of setting, and that we are trying to move away from that, because I don't think that this is where we should be recovering our costs, is when you've given the public a right to be heard and then they can't get into the hearing room. And we just think that it does not match up with the financial policies of the city for this kind of activity.
And there's a deep irony here that the very people that are likely to be aggrieved, who are customers of the Water Bureau or BES, are people saying they can't afford their bill. And if they can't afford their bill, and we say we have good news and we have bad news, we have an administrative review process, but you're unlikely to be able to afford it, then I think we've got a problem. And I think you've made that point very eloquently.
Good. Other questions, comments? Yeah, if you could follow up with us with a little bit more background detail about this, and maybe again spend some time with chiefs of staff about it, it'd be helpful to me. Anything else? Thank you very much. Let's move to the city attorney.
Is this percentage change, or is that just a percentage? Percent change. So every year increasing by 40%. Documents viewed. You can't do that.
Unique, not necessarily unique documents. So it could be the same person opening up the document.
But still, a percentage change would indicate that you're increasing that percentage. So if there's 1,000 documents for this year, it would be
1,000 increments of the document. It's not unique documents, but you're right, it's correct. It's more traffic.
Oh, sorry. Good morning. Mayor, members of the council, Budget Advisory Committee members. I'm Tracy Reeve. I'm the Portland City Attorney. With me today is our Business Operations Supervisor, Christine Jividen, and Chief Deputy City Attorney, Harry Auerbach. I would first like to thank the members of our office's Budget Advisory Committee for their thoughtful work, particularly our Citizen Advisor, Portland Attorney Melvin Oden-Orr, and our Client Advisor, Shelley Tompkins from PBEM. And I also want to give a shout out to Dante James and the Office of Equity and Human Rights for developing the Budget Equity Assessment Tool, which our BAC and office used extensively in developing our budget and found very useful. While our office is very small in terms of the overall city budget, at just 0.3% of the city budget, we believe we have an impact on virtually all of the city's operations. As you know, we are responsible for all of the legal affairs of the city of Portland. It is our mission to provide excellent, objective, timely, and cost-effective legal advice and advocacy in support of the city's policy goals, and to ensure that the official actions of the city, its elected officials, and employees comply with the law. To carry out our mission, we work with every elected official, office, and bureau of the city, and we provide legal services as well to all of the city boards and commissions as they are needed. We have 4 strategic goals. One is to provide the highest level of customer service to our clients through legal advice that is timely, accurate, and easy to access. To effectively and vigorously advocate for the city's interests in court and other contested proceedings. To support and advance the city's objective of achieving equity in all of its programs, services, and activities, and to ensure the accountability for our office's professional performance and effective stewardship of public resources. On that last goal, I would just like to mention that we were very fortunate to have a performance audit this past year by the auditor's team, and actually were gratified by the generally positive findings. We also appreciated the 3 suggestions that were made that will help us, we think, particularly with our accountability goal in taking our strategic goals to the next level through additional performance measures and a strategic plan that has sort of steps for making sure that we're realizing those goals. In terms of significant budget issues, in looking forward over the next 5 years, there are 2 significant budget issues we'd like to highlight for you. First, we believe that citywide, we have a need for greater independent investigative capacity and enforcement capacity, both for civil rights matters and generally for code enforcement issues and the like. This does not necessarily correspond to our office's budget needs. We think it's a broader city question, and it's one that we will be working on with a variety of other bureaus, including the Auditor's Office, the Office of Equity and Human Rights, the Bureau of Human Resources, and others, to come back with a recommendation for you for next year. But what I want to see that recommendation have is a mechanism to have autonomous investigative capacity in the city, as well as greater capacity to do civil rights and code enforcement. Obviously, that will also impact the discussion that I just heard about the code hearings officer, and we plan to work closely with the auditor about that. And as I say, that's a proposal that I think requires discussion among a variety of bureaus and obviously elected offices, and that's something that we anticipate that not just we, but other bureaus will be coming forward to you with next year with a proposal. The other significant budget issue that is particular to our office is a need for additional support staff, in particular legal assistants and paralegals over the next 5 years. We have increased our attorney staff at a much faster pace over the past 15 years than we have our professional support staff. Part of this is due to attorneys doing more of the work themselves that legal secretaries and others used to do, as they do more word processing, more typing of their own briefs, more communication via email rather than formal letters that a legal assistant would type and send out. But some of it is just due to the fact that when we've needed, often we've come to council and identified a need over the past 15 years for an additional attorney. When we ask for an attorney and support staff, we have often gotten the attorney and not gotten the support staff. That's happened enough times that our support staff is really getting stretched very thin at this point. And just to give you an example, we look back and 15 or so years ago, we used to average 3 attorneys to each legal assistant. Now, many of our legal assistants are juggling 6 attorneys. And it's just not sustainable over the long term. Another example is last year, we were very gratified when council did fund our request for an attorney position to work on legal records management. That work has been continuing apace and will continue. We also asked for a paralegal. That request was not granted, but we really needed a paralegal to do the work. And so we realigned a litigation paralegal to that position. That has left us extremely short-staffed in paralegals in our litigation group. So those are just some examples. We're not asking for additional support staff this year, but it is a need that I'm going to have a mutiny on my hands soon if I don't figure out a way to do something about it.
So why aren't you asking for one this year?
Just as we looked at priorities, and given that it was a, what do you call it? Maintenance
Stabilization.
budget. Yes,
Stabilization.
Stabilization budget. We again are asking for an attorney position, but just felt that that was a higher priority. But
well, you just made a very compelling case. So other folks have been adding stuff to their requested budgets. I mean, I recognize that many bureaus, including yours, were constrained by the requirement to propose a cut if you're proposing a new. It makes sense to me that employing more folks who are at a paralegal level would actually be would be very cost effective.
Well, it is true that as you know, when our legal assistants and paralegals are completely booked, then what ends up happening is attorneys do some of those things themselves that don't. Some of it makes sense for them to do. I mean, I think it's become more effective that attorneys are typing their own briefs while a legal assistant gets it finalized. Some of it is not so effective, and when you can't find a legal assistant who has the time to do it and you go do it yourself. So yes, if there's an opportunity to ask for that this year, we would love to do that.
So I believe the city attorney's office by charter answers to all 5 of the councils, so please consider this a request from me to propose such a package.
Great, thank you very much, Commissioner Fritz. No, I can Okay. The next area I wanted to address was service inequities. In looking at service inequities, we have focused on our ability to meaningfully assist in the areas of policy development and implementation in the areas of civil rights enforcement, housing equities, the DOJ settlement enforcement, Title VI and Title II work, Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title II of the ADA, disability policies, updating the city's civil rights ordinance, looking at city facilities and their accessibility to those of all gender identities and gender expressions, and policies to assist returning citizens in successfully reintegrating into society. We also believe we could do more in areas of citywide training on some of these areas that I've just mentioned, as well as a variety of access to justice issues along the lines of what the auditor staff was just addressing with the code hearings officer, because when costs are prohibitive, it does raise access to justice issues. Our key decision package thus far is to fund an additional deputy city attorney position to focus on these areas of civil rights enforcement and to assist with developing a proposal to bring forward to you next year about the things I mentioned citywide. An additional focus of this position will be to assist in the development and implementation of legislation and policies to achieve the city's goals to bolster economic opportunity for all Portlanders, livability in all neighborhoods, and equity in service delivery. This position will continue to work on, well, we already have a person doing this work on a temporary basis. We were able to reallocate some funds from the DOJ work that got deferred for the rest of this fiscal year, but we will not be able to continue to fund the position absent council taking positive action on this decision package. And the work that is currently being done is the Ban the Box work on housing displacement issues and how best to address those, where we're aware that past city policies have contributed to housing displacement, and work on a variety of other equity, broadly speaking, equity policy initiatives and civil rights. And another area where we really want to be able to do more is more training of city staff in conjunction with the Office of Equity and Human Rights on the city's legal obligations under Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is our sort of outward-facing obligation to ensure that all programs, services, and activities of the city are available to all citizens without discrimination on the basis of the variety of protected classes. Our key decision package does link directly to our key priorities, both of that of providing the highest level of customer service through timely and accurate legal advice, and in terms of our goal of supporting and advancing the city's objective of achieving equity in all of its services, programs, and activities. It's also directly related to that portion of our mission focused on ensuring that the official actions of the city, its elected officials, and employees comply with the law. Particularly in the Title VI arena, that's where we believe that having more training and outreach to make sure that all of the city bureaus and staff are aware of those obligations and what they mean would be very useful. We also believe that this position will enable us to continue to make measurable progress towards the mayor's identified priorities of equity and opportunity in complete neighborhoods by allowing us to perform more work, as I mentioned, in the areas of civil rights enforcement, compliance and training, and also on legal strategies to address housing equities and displacement. Our other budget requests are revenue neutral, so I wasn't going to address those specifically unless there were questions.
Maybe just a quick, you explained it in the narrative, but big drop over the last couple of years in outside counsel expenses, and you're proposing, what, 600,000 this year, right?
Yes, we have had a big drop in outside counsel costs for a variety of reasons. One is that we had a big spike due to a very large case that was handled by outside counsel, and we also had some significant expenses for Superfund. We have not had outside counsel for the Superfund matter for the last couple of years, although we will be retaining outside counsel again for a very strategic advice and direction, although not the day-to-day work. We don't anticipate that being at the rate at which the prior outside counsel, just because of where the process is and also because of the outside counsel that we have identified and anticipate contracting with. We do anticipate an uptick, which is why you see the number moving from 400 and something to a projected 600 and something next year. But we also have a focus in the office on limiting our use of outside counsel to those situations where ideally we would like to limit our outside counsel to 2 situations and avoid using outside counsel for overload issues because it's much more expensive. Our average outside counsel, even when we negotiated a discounted rate, is often $300 and something, whereas our cost of providing legal services we project next year to be $138. So it's a big delta. We also think that we have more expertise about the city's needs and legal work than most outside counsel do. So we want to avoid those overflow uses of outside counsel wherever we can.
What are the 2 areas where you would use outside counsel?
The 2 areas are conflicts where we don't have a choice. Legally, we have to get outside counsel in some situations. If we have, say we have a police case and there's the potential for discipline of an officer at the same time that we're defending a case, then because we have adverse interests potentially with that officer, we need to hire outside counsel for them. And the other issue is, or the other area is where we really do need that specialized expertise. For example, hiring strategy counsel for Superfund, and there are other areas. Bond counsel will always use bond counsel because that's an area of specialized expertise, and that does come up occasionally. But even there, we're trying to, where possible, hire outside counsel, get the benefit of their expertise and strategy, and still do the work that we can do ourselves rather than just handing the entire matter over to outside counsel.
I've been spending a lot of time with lawyers in your office recently. I think it has something to do with my bureaus. But I want to first say that my office, me in particular, we feel we are very well served by the lawyers in your office. And as you know, we have some very complex cases, big litigation, as Margaret Bax would say, gnarly cases. And so we really appreciate the professionalism and the attention we're getting on tough matters. On the question of whether your office expands the scope of its operations at some point and does more on the enforcement side and maybe creates a sort of civil rights area and staffs up. One of the, I want to be clear about the concern I've shared with you. It is not that we don't have superb lawyers and the capacity to do it right in-house. I think that goes without saying. I think that I would distinguish between the lawyers who give us advice and keep us on the straight and narrow versus actually doing administrative enforcement kinds of duties. And on that front, what a key factor for me will be, what's the difference in costs between creating our own enforcement shop versus contracting with someone who does that already, like the Bureau of Labor and Industries. And if there was a significant cost difference, that would be a big factor in my thinking, separate and apart from whether we should have more people with expertise to advise us about compliance generally. And the truth is, we are adopting lots of laws and rules, and we do need people that understand them and can advise us. And that's separate from whether they should be doing the enforcement. I echo what Commissioner Fritz said about having legal assistance. In fact, I will say that the law firms I used to practice at, the trend was to hire more and more legal assistants, and they are of such quality and professionalism that they can handle things that once upon a time were really thought to be lawyers' work. And what that frees up is lawyers to come into our offices and give us high-level legal advice and not just be burdened with collecting documents and doing some of the stuff which is important but can be very time-consuming. So I echo what Amanda said. I think you should put in a request. If there's any budget, you should do it. I think this is the year that you should have the staff support And frankly, if I call Harry on a time-sensitive matter and I hear that he's busy typing up a brief, I would say that I'd rather he was working with someone who's helping him with that and able to come up and come down and give us legal advice in a timely manner. So you have my support on that. And I want to just ask you one other question. We're now, what, a year into the experiment of having a dedicated lawyer handling public records. How's that working out?
Well, I just want to clarify, Commissioner Fish, which is that the lawyer who is dedicated to that position is absolutely working on handling some public records, but the intent of the position is not to have one person whose job it is to handle public records. It's to really be looking systematically across the city at how we're managing our legal records and coming up with new systems for doing that and doing citywide training about that. And so just with that caveat, I think it's going very, very well. We anticipate sometime in the next, certainly by the end of this fiscal year, beginning implementation of GovQ&A, which is our new citywide public records software. We'll be doing public records request software. We'll be doing training for that. We're also issuing right now, or very shortly, an RFI on a kind of a broader look at how can we integrate litigations records management, public records management. It's more of a global solution to some of our issues, and we're doing an RFI process because we want to get some really creative and innovative thinking on ways that we might do that. We thought some people in the information management sector might have better ideas about how to do that than the lawyers do, but we think it's really progressing well, and we're going to have a briefing of the commissioners and of bureau directors in the next month or so to update you on the status of that project.
As part of that, I'd like to make a request. I know that the new governor has put in place some new protocols on public records, and I would say that over the last 7 years, the thing that's maybe changed the most in my experience in this council is the extent of public records requests, the volume, the breadth. They're now more open-ended. We get them all the time. And what makes it especially complicated is sometimes we've got a lawsuit, a ballot measure, and an ongoing maybe interest by a citizen, and we got to make sure that we're coordinating and all the documents are being produced in a timely manner. I do know that the governor has either proposed or implemented a new rule that says all public records requests get posted on a consolidated website and the documents are produced. Our friends in the media don't like that, because it deprives them of the advantage of being first to market and getting the documents. It does, however, seem to me, have a compelling public interest in saying that once a public records request is made, presumably the public should benefit from that, and we should not be just rewarding one reporter or cherry picking. The information should be posted in one site so that a citizen can go and find out all the requests and all the disclosures. I don't know whether that's workable. I don't know whether you support it.
Oh, I do support it, and that's part of the intent. I believe we'll get part way there with the GovQ&A software, and absolutely in the RFI, that's one of the things.
One of the benefits of that, frankly, is we don't often know what public records requests are being served on our colleagues. And not that I want to spend my precious limited free time outside of work scanning that information. I do think that having it in one place does mean that we and the public can access it more easily. And again, if the governor and the state can make that work, I hope we take a good look at it.
Yes, and that is, as I say, we're in process on that. I think even the initial GovQ&A software will allow access to the public records requests that are out there. I'm not sure whether that software or the next iteration will also make all of the records that have been produced in response to public records requests searchable, with some limited exceptions.
So we had this conversation last week during the Man the Box discussion. You're going to take a leadership role in putting together a comprehensive proposal for enforcement of various civil rights, sick leave, Man the Box. So, I mean, I feel we're kind of incrementally backing into that without sort of the comprehensive approach. So when would we expect from you a comprehensive proposal?
So my objective is An intent is to very shortly begin, I mean, I've had some preliminary discussions with other bureau directors and various entities in the city, but in a more formal way to begin sitting down, talking about what the needs are. I mean, it's at a very preliminary stage. It's a need that I think we have had, and that others that in the city that I've talked to concur that we have a need. How that gets addressed, what the best way is, I don't know, and I don't want to prejudge that. So I don't feel like the intent certainly isn't to back into anything. It's rather to kind of preview for you that that's work that we will be doing cooperatively within the city to come back to you with possible proposals on ways forward. I would think that that would occur in the next budget cycle. I think there's going to be some discussions throughout the year and with commission's council member staffs and with the auditor staff on what those needs are. There may be some alternative proposals come forward. And I did want to mention Commissioner Fish stepped out, but by no means do I think that the conclusion should be that this work or the function is centered in the city attorney's office. I think it's an open question of how that could best be structured, looking across what other comparable jurisdictions are doing, what's the most effective, what's the most cost effective, what is the right balance of other enforcement agencies versus us having the capacity to enforce sort of uniquely city-created rights. Does
So
that answer
if
your
I may just
question?
add to that. In my mind, this position is not specifically for that.
Correct.
It's more, several of our bureaus have an equity manager, almost deputy director, and I've been really impressed with Judy Prosper's work with the Department of Justice. So I see this position needed as throughout the city attorney's office, as well as advising all of the bureaus. We need somebody who's an expert in equity issues, and that may or may not involve the civil rights enforcement or any of the particular complaints that we may get. It's needed anyway, and I think will inform your getting at your next proposal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is one area of work I would see assigning to this position over the coming year is working on that analysis of do we have unmet needs, and if so, what are they? And do we have access to justice issues that are precluding our citizens from, along the lines of what the auditor was discussing, that are precluding our citizens from enforcing rights that they have? But we have the council has, and I'm delighted by it, been doing a lot of work in the areas of, equity being a priority, recognizing folks' civil rights. There's a breadth of work that falls into that general category. And it's a priority of our office. As I mentioned, it's one of our key strategic goals. And we really need someone who has that expertise and can be the point person on those issues for our office.
Do other cities of our size tend to have something like a civil rights enforcement office? Like I know Seattle has an office that, for example, I don't know if this exactly qualifies as civil rights, but they have aggressive city policies to assist in combating wage theft, and I think they have internal capacity to deal with that.
Most cities of our size, and then, we often like to compare ourselves to Seattle, San Francisco, which are, of course, a little bit larger, but and they both have very, very robust civil rights enforcement and other, as you say, wage claims, that kind of thing, enforcement capacity. Even other cities that are more our size, if you look at the Madison, Wisconsins and Denver, well, it's bigger, but again, somewhat comparable. Some of the mid-sized California cities, they really do have civil rights enforcement offices, whether that's what they're called or not. And so particularly given Portland's emphasis on equity, civil rights, those kinds of issues, and often seeing ourselves at the forefront of some of those issues, we are behind other comparable cities in terms of our enforcement capacity.
When we were setting up the Office of Equity and Human Rights, there was definitely consideration of perhaps in phase 2 or phase 3 of that office that the civil rights component could be added there. So I think there's some discussions to be had as to whether it properly belongs in city attorney's office or in the Office of Equity.
And again, I just want to emphasize, I don't see that entire function being housed in the city attorney's office. I think we may have a support role of prosecuting some violations, but I've never thought that that whole, civil rights enforcement office should land in the city attorney's office. I just want to be clear about that.
That's going to be another good discussion. Following up from that, I'm a little wondering about the realignment package taking the Department of Justice funding for the community office, the community liaison, out of the city attorney's office and into the mayor's office. I certainly understand why it should be general fund rather than overhead fund. The compliance office community liaison is accountable to all of the council, and so I'm concerned about the perception in the community of taking it out of the city attorney's office that answers to everybody, all the members of the council.
Right, and Christine may be better able to address this. It's not the normal type of funding that comes out of our office, and we felt that the funding would better come from another source. What that source was. So yeah, Ellen Osenak is the one who, posited how that realignment should occur. Our concern was simply that it had sort of been parked in the city attorney's office initially, although it wasn't normally the type of funding that would be coming through our office. And so
well, it actually was chosen to be put in the city attorney's office so that it was an office that by charter is accountable to all 5 members of the council. So it's a technical nuance, but it seems to me that many of our bureaus have different flavors of money coming, or different colors of money, as Commissioner Fish calls it, coming through them. So was there a policy question in moving it to the mayor's office?
Pardon me? I'm sorry.
Is there a policy component?
I'm going to, if you don't mind, because I'm not conversant with all of the thoughts why the money should be transferred out, other than, as I've said, because it's not generally the kind of funding that we handle, and it's not technically for legal services. May I have Ellen Osenak follow up with you on the policy aspects of it? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This has been really an interesting discussion, and a lot of it, I can tell there's a lot more expertise in the room than mine. But I did want to echo that enforcement of civil rights around housing is, I've hear anecdotal stories about people not being able to find apartments and being discriminated against. So I think that is a real issue. And also, I was looking at your dashboard, and I was, I kind of just wanted to reflect a little bit. That attorney hourly rate, I'm not sure why you would want that on there. I just wasn't sure why you would want that on there, because you remember this is going to go before the public, and they're just going to look at that and think, wow, they're making a lot of money, even though you guys probably aren't compared to other lawyers. And the other thing, it seems like you are reacting to risk to the city. Is that right? In other words, that in a way, what you're doing is you're there to reduce the risk to the city of big lawsuits, small lawsuits, whatever. And so I think consider finding a measure of risk and then showing how you reduce it. That would be a measure that would promote your department and also help people understand what lawyers for the city of Portland do. And then it sounds like you're trying to get into more proactive issues, and I don't know how far you're going to go into that, but then you would probably want some measures to show how you are doing in those proactive measures. And that's about it's pretty high level what I'm saying, but I hope that is helpful.
Well, I appreciate that, and I did want to just mention on the hourly rate, that's not the hourly rate that our lawyers are making. That's the hourly rate that our cost of providing legal services all in. So.
Right. Okay, but I still don't understand why it would be on your.
Well, if I can offer something on that. We track the cost to the city of an hour of attorney services in order to try to keep ourselves in mind, to make sure that the cost to the city of using us, we're not wasting money. Okay, so our cost of service, which basically takes our budget and divides it among the total hours that attorneys actually work. So it doesn't count vacation and sick time and that stuff. It's just the hours that people actually work. That reflects what the true cost to the city of getting an hour's worth of legal services. And that's we think that's an important thing for the council and the public to know, and particularly to try to keep it as stable as we can, to show that we are efficient stewards of public resources, which I think we are. I just want to make one comment on the question of risk. It is true that we try to help the city reduce its risk, but I want to be clear that how much risk the city takes is frequently a question of policy. And what we do is we advise the council and the bureaus about the potential risks of various things that they want to do, and they ultimately, for the most part, get to choose how much risk the matter warrants. That is, if they have an initiative that is central to what it is they're trying to accomplish, they may be willing to take a little more risk than just some ordinary run-of-the-mind contract that we have with somebody. So in one respect, yes, we are trying to reduce risk. In the other, but in a larger sense, we're trying to manage risk to encourage the council and the bureaus to take what we call prudent risks in order to accomplish the larger goals of the organization. And in terms of trying to find measures to measure that, it's a great point and something I'm sure we'll follow up on. What we found is it's very hard to measure what doesn't happen. And so we're still trying to wrap our heads around that, but I appreciate the point. So
Yeah, I don't have any suggestions, but that's just what came to mind. And I think you would want to bracket that attorney hourly rate in some way that the public would understand why you had it there.
Good points. And speaking of risk, we're at risk of blowing our schedule. So unless
Could I
there are
make
any other
2 points quickly?
Quick.
The first is regarding the public records requests. One of the things I'm trying to do in the comp plan this time around is take our open data policy, which today exists only as a resolution, beef it up and make it a comp plan policy. So a lot of the sort of ordinary operational data of the city would become available to citizens and others on a self-service basis. The main goal is to allow people to figure out how to innovate using that data, but a side effect is that people won't have to file public records requests to get some of that data. They can just self-serve, so it should have a side effect of using some of this problem. And I just want to support the request for equity personnel. You know, every part of city government that I touch, we're working on equity, whether it's the comp plan. You know, yesterday I was at the Active Transportation Summit, and equity was the lunchtime keynote. It just makes sense to me that we should have strong support for that in your office, so I hope we can fund that.
Thank you very much. All right, Martha, you're next.
No, there you go.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Hales, Commissioners, members of the Budget Committee. For the record, Martha Pellegrino, Director of the Office of Government Relations. With me today is David Salerno Owens, who's a member of our Budget Advisory Committee. And be gentle on us. David is a new father as of 2 weeks ago. He has a 2-week-old at home, and so he may even be more sleep deprived as the rest of us. So thank you. Really would like to just begin by thanking the other members of our Budget Advisory Committee who aren't here today, Nova Newcomer and Mark Landauer, as well as Doug Lee, our budget analyst, who has been very helpful with technical assistance throughout this process. I'll begin by addressing a couple of the significant issues and then turn things over to David to talk about our decision packages. So the mission of the Office of Government Relations is to advance the City of Portland's legislative and intergovernmental policy objectives. The office provides effective representation, strategic advice, and quality service to the City Council and all city bureaus. That means we represent every division of the city, inclusive of the City Auditor and the Portland Development Commission, all with 8 FTE. Our issues and workflow on a daily, monthly, and annual basis are driven by the needs of the city and address a wide variety of critical issues such as affordable housing, transportation, public safety, emergency preparedness, water, sewer, and parks infrastructure, property taxation, economic development, and so on. I think you get the idea. Our biggest issue in the next 5 years is meeting the increasing demands for the services in our office and addressing those capacity issues. Our current operating structure is simply not sustainable. So one thing we have learned since the legislature moved to annual sessions a few years back is that there is no longer a break in the legislative cycle. As a city, we are either preparing legislative agendas, we are in Salem advocating for those, or we are reporting on what happened as a result of those sessions, and then the cycle repeats itself. The other thing we've found is that there's no longer ebbs in that work. The pace of the current legislative session is quite simply relentless and does not appear to be letting up anytime soon. We are arguably advancing the most ambitious legislative agenda in Portland's recent history, and we're actively engaging on dozens of other issues that are all moving very quickly. This means very practically, I need to spend more of my time in Salem making sure that we are advancing our priorities, defending against things that impact the city, our operations, and our funding, and that tends to take substantial attention away from our other program areas, which include federal legislative affairs, intergovernmental, international, and administrative functions. So all of those demands that are happening at a very fast pace put additional pressure on an already lean office. And in our office, for those of you who work with us, know that every single day we aspire to very high levels of service and responsiveness. So that gives you at least a little bit of a framework for our decision packages, and I'll turn things over to David to touch on those. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor Hales, City Commissioners, Budget Committee members. For the record, my name is David Sloner Owens, and this is my second year serving on the Office of Government Relations Budget Advisory Committee. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to be here before you today. I'm here to give you some insight into our committee's decision-making process and our recommendations on the decision packages. The committee recommended advancing two decision packages that recognize the increasing demand of services to all city bureaus and offices provided by the Office of Government Relations, as well as the increasing needs associated with taking over the city's international relations program. First, the committee recommended approval of ongoing funding for adding a deputy director. This request reflects the high demands placed on a very small office and the need for some additional assistance with lobbying and operations. One of the unique challenges faced by the office is the need to operate programs in Salem, Washington, D.C., and Portland. A deputy director would allow the office to operate in a more sustainable manner. Second, the committee recommended approval of an add package of ongoing funding for the annual hiring of a PSU Hatfield Fellow to add the program capacity to the city's international relations program. Currently, the program operates with one dedicated FTE with support from other staff in OGR. When it came to determining offsets for these two decision packages, our committee had substantial disagreement and did not reach consensus. What we found is that a very small office, there is not an obvious offset for adding a new FTE. The only item in the budget large enough to offset the deputy director, other than cutting the director's position herself, was cutting the city's contract for federal lobbying services. One member strongly objected to this approach, since the contract provides services that are core to the office's mission. The offset for the international relations decision package is cutting funds available to support state legislative outreach and lobbying during the interim. Again, one member strongly objected for the reason that state outreach and lobbying is core to the mission of OGR. On behalf of BAC, we appreciate the difficult decisions you have ahead and appreciate the opportunity to present to you. I'll now turn this presentation back to Martha.
Great, thanks very much, David. So I'll just briefly touch on the key priorities and performance measures and then open it up to you all and your questions. So our requested budget very likely touches on all three of the mayor's budget priorities for 2015-2016. And while we won't begin our official process for building the 2016 legislative agenda until this summer, if this year serves an indicator, we've been actively engaged in legislation in each of these areas, and I expect similar issues to be raised in the year ahead. For example, we are working actively on bills that expand Portland's sick time ordinance to the rest of the state, that remove the state preemption on inclusionary zoning, that create more financing options for seismic upgrades, that advocate for more resources to support community-based mental health services, and lobbying on closing the loophole on background checks for gun purchases. And incidentally, the mayor will be down in Salem tomorrow and very early in the morning testifying in favor of that bill. And at the federal level, we have lobbied for additional emergency preparedness resources and have been providing assistance with federal initiatives such as the White House Tech Hire program, designed to bring more individuals from underrepresented communities into high-tech jobs. With regard to performance measures, and in consultation with the Budget Office, we are continuing one performance measure, and we added one new performance measure, both of which help us track the effectiveness of the services we provide. The first is our responsiveness to client requests, and second is the new one, which is our overall customer rating. And we get these measures because every July we send out a customer service surveys to each of our clients, and we use the results of that survey to determine how well we're doing and identify our areas for improvement for the coming year.
Martha, how would you define a client?
I see our clients as every single city bureau, every single council office, and all of, basically, we represent you all when it comes to the state legislature, federal government, et cetera. We also added one new performance measure, and that is the number of international delegations received. And it was in our last budget. We had funding from the council to support one FTE for the International Relations Program when that program moved from the mayor's office into our office. This performance measure will serve as an indicator of our goal to make Portland a more welcoming international city. And if the international relations package is funded, this will add to our office's capacity to meet with incoming international delegations when they come to Portland and help meet the targets set forth in our requested budget. So with that, I'll conclude our presentation, and thank you for consideration of our requested budget, and happy to take any questions.
You know, Martha, I think we all think that your office does a fantastic job. I didn't find the dashboards for your bureau very helpful or necessarily kind of useful as a way of evaluating your effectiveness. Now, the way that we know that you're effective is every time we're in Salem or Washington, D.C., the people that we are lobbying always tell us that we have the best lobbying shop in the state. So, and they're also free to tell us we had the worst if they thought that. So we get, you know, through the Yelp system of evaluating you, we get great feedback. We also know that you're very successful in helping us achieve our legislative agenda. So both at the federal and state level, every year there's dollars that materialize and policies because of your work. I haven't given this any thought, but I find these three benchmarks seem to be unduly inward-looking. If you're at 96% customer rating, I would scrap that one because I'm not sure it tells us anything other than there's an amen chorus, and I'd like to know who that 4% is. The mayor can deal with them privately. But that doesn't seem very instructive. I'm not even sure the international delegation piece is that useful. The mayor yesterday made a compelling argument that one of the things that's happened in the last X number of years is that more local delegations from within this country are coming here. I frankly think that's probably more useful to us than having international, unless we can point to specific things beyond, you know, sister city relationships that get nurtured. And in terms of responsiveness, again, you're at 100%. I'm not sure I would scrap that one too, because it seems like you're doing a great job with your customers and clients. I'm not sure it tells the other story that we want the public to know, which is how damn effective you are taking our legislative agenda and translating it into success. And I don't know how you measure that, but that ultimately is your job. And I'm not sure these indicators tell the full story.
Well, Commissioner Fish, I completely agree with you. I think we've struggled for many years to try to find what's the right indicator. Is it the number of bills introduced in Salem? Is it the number we engage on? Is it the number of priorities of the cities that get passed? And we've worked with the Budget Office year after year to try to find that, which is why we do have these other ways that every year we try to get a feedback loop. So if it's not an indicator, it's a mix of quantitative and qualitative feedback to tell us how we're doing. I think for the international delegations number received, it's also a challenge for us to find a quantifiable thing we can count that helps us get toward one of our goals. But I'd be happy if others had ideas about what things are a good measure. Be happy to explore those. And the reason that we're using customer rating and client responsiveness is it does tell me if that number goes down, it tells me we're not doing something right. And that's why at least we have a quantifiable measure. But again, I'm open for things that are a better reflection of our effectiveness.
I'm just inherently skeptical of any benchmark that starts at you being at 100%. Because the only thing we'll be measuring is whether you come down a little bit. And it seems to me that you uniquely and your office uniquely is responsive. And so I'm not sure that tells us anything. And I don't think there's going to be a great variance as long as you're at the helm. So I'd rather find something where we put you to a stretch. I'm not sure it's fair to say how many bills get passed or how much dollars, because again, that's like one of the indicators we looked at yesterday, where it takes, you're only as good as, who's in charge of the legislature, what's the dynamic. We can't penalize you for if there's a Tea Party takeover and nothing ever gets done. We can't ding you for that. But I'd be interested in what other benchmarks maybe your peer group use. And maybe, frankly, we should expand the definition of customer. I'd be interested in knowing in some, reasonable cycle, what do the stakeholders, what do the people that you interact with think about your office, your professionalism, your effectiveness? And if it came back that legislators, trade associations, local government all gave you high marks, I think that's a better indicator than what we already know, which is you do a hell of a job for us. Just food for thought.
Anonymous will have a weak rating like legislators do.
Yeah.
That sounds really great. Thanks, Mayor.
Actually,
really would look forward to seeing the results of that. And in some ways, it's interesting because part of the difficulty of the job of our office is that by representing the city, we are, when we're advocating in favor of things and building coalitions, we'll be arm in arm with other organizations. But when we are opposing pieces of legislation, not everyone necessarily is going to be happy that we've taken a stand on that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not effective. If we keep a piece of legislation that costs the city $2 million a year from moving forward, that's a positive. So I'm happy to circle back with the budget office and see if we can find something. But to Commissioner Fish's point, I agree. I think it's a very difficult thing to measure, which is why I tend to go back to all of you and say, how are we doing every year, and look for those areas of improvement.
I think the Mercury did a rating of lobbyists a few years ago, which resulted in a cover with Kristen Leonard with a halo around her head. So maybe we should encourage them to go back to doing that.
Yeah, I did. I just want to say how important I think what you do is. And the East Portland Action Plan does advocacy. And so we've not done really very much federal, but we have actually reached out to the legislature and done lobbying there. And so it feels like if you guys are not staffed up enough to do your function, the city is leaving money on the table, because oftentimes that it can directly result in projects like Powell Boulevard being funded, which is, that's going to come from the state. And so it's an important function that can really have an impact on the city. And it's kind of quietly working away there in the background, but wow, I was so amazed when Powell got, because of some advocacy that we did, perhaps you guys did it too, we ended up with some funding that just wouldn't have come through the city on its own. So this is this is a really important function. I know in the past they've gotten cut fairly severely, so I just wanted to speak up for them.
Dante.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer a quick thought on the position since my office got thrown into the comparison for you. It shows us that, in talking about ratios, we're 1.6 to 2.6. The 0.6 is the position that we just asked for in reallocation or in this budget yesterday. And we didn't ask for a position in total because we don't have an offset to give, somewhat similar to OGR. So I would certainly suggest we don't have the administrative staff that we need, and I can certainly echo her understanding and express need for some additional administrative staff.
And I was saying, Mr. Mayor, if I just provide one clarification, which is the request for a deputy director is not administrative in nature, and this is where and Doug, our budget analyst, he and I kind of went back and forth that I think the comparison bureaus in question have a director, an assistant director generally of sorts, and an administrative assistant. So I'm not sure how that number squares with us, because it is me as a manager. I have somebody in Salem who oversees the operations of the Salem office and the Salem team, but that's it. And then we have a business operations, and we even, because we're so small in the nature of small offices, is you split up responsibilities to staff. And so my administrative assistant in the office is providing quite a bit of support to international relations. I mean, there is just the record keeping and preparing our quarterly state ethics forms, or things that we do that are requirements of state law that no other office does. And if we don't do them well, there are serious consequences for the city. So I just want to make that clarification that this may be an area where I think the budget office is reading our request differently than we are.
So I just, on those numbers, we did take into account the percentages of those positions that were administrative. And so the deputy director position is classified as 25% administrative, 75% program. I think we tried to do that for the comparison between all the offices. And again, we were just trying to sort of benchmark of the small offices, of which the three of us really represent the smallest of the city, how does it compare in terms of administrative staff? So we were trying to get at those specific pieces of FTEs, though.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Big change in your life.
Yes,
and
it is.
Appreciate you still being willing to serve in this capacity despite sleep deprivation. So, thank you. Thank you all. Okay, well, I think we're close to being on schedule, and Mr. Miller and his team are here, so let's move to OMF.
Mayor, would you please swear in the witness? We're going to pin you down today, Mr. Director.
I want to make sure I got plenty of paper. Good morning. Fred Miller, Director of OMF, Office of Management and Finance. And I understand, as the ground rules go, I've got something like 20 minutes, and then there are like 40 minutes for questions. And I think that all of you in the council are familiar with the organization, but probably worthwhile for the committee to get that piece of paper in hand, because it's going to help me walk through the variety of comments I want to make. Basically, OMF has 4 bureaus and some other functions like EBS, the SAP operation, public safety systems, revitalization programs, and then in my office we have a business operations team and a policy team. So this is a little bit different than some of the bureau presentations in that I'm sort of the hood ornament here to represent 4 different bureaus, and I'm going to fit them all together as we go through here. The resources and requirements you can get into if you'd like. I wasn't going to spend lots of time there, but it shows where funds come from and where they go. Inside, there's a brief explanation of the different bureaus and what they do, and then a rendition of our significant issues and some comments on budget development. I'm going to get into those. At the bottom of the 3rd page, there's a listing of decision packages. I've got a little bit to add to that. And then on the last page, the performance measures. And I'm not going to be reading from that, but I'm going to be alluding to that as I go through and use my 20 minutes. The first thing I want to talk about is really our budget development process. And we have been trying to make sure that we are listening to customers and have some surveys out in terms of how we're doing. And I've asked all bureau directors if they can think of anything that OMF should be doing that we're not, so that we can either solve a problem or do something better. And in the budget process, we've said to different bureaus, we don't want to treat this like peanut butter, where we give a service to everyone. If somebody wants to buy more services of some kind, we want to be responsive if that's what the customer wants. So we have gone through some customer survey, customer discussion to get to some of our packages. And then we have our usual bunch of needs that surface as the bureau directors look at what they need for the next year. An example of the customer responsiveness, we have a facilities maintenance technician that's responsive to Paul Scarlett and BDS. They want some more maintenance in the facilities they have, and they essentially are buying that position. We've got a resource management position that is funded by either savings in our utility bills or by contributions from different bureaus because of what we'll be doing for them. And we've got a financial software package that is being funded by our customers. So those are really us being the representative of our customers and getting some things done that they would like. However, when we put together all the needs from our bureaus and those kinds of packages and went to our Budget Advisory Committee, and later David Schaff, as a member of our committee, will make a few comments, I thought that our total package was exorbitant. And when I say exorbitant, it was, we had, for maybe the best or the worst example, if we did everything that people wanted to do, it would have cost the police $1.5 million more for next year. And we felt like that wasn't the way we wanted to treat our customers by having the huge bill, because we wanted to do what some had asked for, but we stepped back on a couple of different packages that I thought were good ones, but it was not timely. And two in particular that I'll mention were creating a sinking fund for fueling stations. There's a package there, and we're just going to be constructing the fueling stations, given the council decision on, what, eight new stations. We've got a lot of assets that don't have sinking funds that will be in worse shape than that. And we thought this may not be the year to create that fund, even though in the longer term that's a good idea. And in terms of whatever funds we have that represent reserves to replace our buildings, I think the industry standard is something like 3% we should be putting away. We're at something like 1.2, and we had an amount there, but again, that's going to cost our customers quite a bit. We decided, at that time the budget picture was a little bit different, and we decided not to go forward with those. So by the time we got through our Budget Advisory Committee, we really had a pared down package, and I'm going to talk about those packages, but that in terms of our process, that's where we got. I'll make a couple of comments about performance measures at the moment, and then we can get into that in more detail if you'd like. There are the key performance measures, which I'm happy to see CBO working on, but also we had a number of different things that were called performance measures in our budget documents that when I looked at, I thought they weren't. And there were something like 142 measures, many of which were activities and workload measures, but it didn't tell me what I wanted in terms of outcomes or performance. And this is still a work in progress, but we reduced from 142 to 67, and of the 67, 22 of them are new, because we're really trying to look at how do we really measure outcomes that we're responsible for. And then the key performance measures, some of those are not great. I mean, you can see them, but we don't have enough history, even if they're good measures. And some things like a bond rating, the AAA bond rating is something very important for how we handle financial activities, but you either have the AAA or you don't. And that, I don't know if that really gets to the spirit of where we want to ultimately head. But in any case, we did talk about performance measures and worked with the advisory committee. So decision packages is what I really want to focus on, because I think that's where the decisions are, and then you can guide where you'd like. And probably the elephant in the room, that's a little bigger elephant than when we put the budget together, is the Portland building. And we have a realignment package in our budget that was $3.75 million that was set aside for addressing leaks and seismic issues. And we, in our realignment package, suggest that those funds should be used for design of the reconstruction of the Portland building. And that's one that is before you already, and I think we discussed in the work session that was there. So that's an issue, but I've upped the ante some, given where the budget is and then the data that we've got on the Portland building. And that is a package that the CBO now has of $8.75 million, for which represents a 5% of the $175 million cost for the reconstruction of the Portland building. We got those data in within the last week. And policy says that you'd like to get 5% equity in an investment in an asset such as the Portland building. That would represent the 5%, and then the financing of that is yet to be determined. But there is, if the project is to take place, and I want to talk, it's going to get more interesting than that. If we do this, go through with the design sometime next spring, without specifying when, we would probably have to start moving some people out of the Portland building, not determined if it's all or most or some right now, out of the Portland building around a year from now. And if construction were to take place on a pretty aggressive schedule, we could have something done by, I think it's April 2018. And I do have a schedule. But in any case, there's lots of activity that would go on. So I wanted to get into this in a little bit of detail. And one of the interesting aspects of this is the space planning construction aspect. People need to be moved. I'm thinking of space there into different areas, and we're taking some looks at what's available and what's possible. And we have a policy, the council has a policy suggesting that we'd like to get city employees basically together in locations. We'll be moving people out in different directions in order to get the construction going on. But we have to think about, are we going to be true to that policy, or is that where we want to head? There are complications. Some people are looking for buildings in other areas to serve their customers, and it could be we need some small southeast Portland, northeast Portland building that trying to do something with Fleet and Peabot, and maybe you could add something with water customer service, for example. There are other opportunities that we can think about. Working at home, to the extent that's technological possible, is something we may think about. But it gets complicated when we talk about moving people and whatever new building requests that other bureaus are making. So this would be a very active year as we start to try to do all of that. But getting back to where we started, the key components are the 3.75 design, that's a realignment, but the 8.75, if you want to get this launched with an equity contribution. And if you didn't, we could still go through with the design and think of other ways to finance. And Ken Rust is thinking about different ways that we could finance the building, what that flow would be. But in any case, I wanted to start with that one because that's probably the biggest item that fits in this discussion.
Fred, the problem with that issue is we could spend the rest of your time on turning this into a work session to ask questions about, at what point does a revised cost estimate change your grid and set of recommendations? What are the financing options? So I don't want to take up your time now because you've got a lot of other material to cover. Are you planning to come back to us at some point to have this conversation in light of the new cost estimates?
I think it would be a useful work session to do that. Because we do have some choices. I don't know, my personal reaction after dealing with the advisory committee I had is that our best option is to reconstruct the Portland building. But perhaps you need to be convinced of that, but that's where I think it's going to end up in terms of looking at the costs and the alternatives. So I said to Marina Cresswell, who was doing the details, I said, try to bring this in at 118 million. And in fact, she did. But then you add the 20% contingencies and the permits and the money for art and so on, it got up to 175.
Fred, I'm really eager to see at least some initial ideas about financing. Because, for one thing, we do have new ongoing money this year. I don't know if we'll ever have that again in the next 5 years. And I think we should at least think about committing some of that new ongoing general fund to a Portland building plan. So seeing some sort of options, even if it's in preliminary form, before the mayor's proposed budget comes out, I think would be great.
We'd be happy to do that. That would be a good work session item because I think we could show you a flow of funds and what it would cost and different alternatives. But it's a big item. And I think it's something that we need to do. I mean, to go on and repair the seismic and the leak and not do something major is a problem. Spending 175 million is a problem. Okay, and so we'll do a work session whenever you'd like. That's there.
Well, and even if we don't, I mean, work session might be hard to schedule just because of the flow. I would say an updated memo, because you gave us that excellent spreadsheet before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading a book about the Getty Center in Los Angeles, and the original estimate for that building was 80 million, and the final construction tab came in at $500 million. So there were unforeseen things along the way. And but I think that the way you presented it last time with the chart, I think if we just update the numbers and then have a discussion about financing, that would be helpful.
Okay.
And by the way, percent for the art kicks in on a renovation as well as a new construction?
I make that assumption because it was shown there, and
I should know as the arts commissioner, but I would like to know the answer to that.
Okay, but it was shown as a line item, so I assumed it was not gratuitous, but we can check if we. Okay, so that's item one that I wanted to talk about. And I'm really working through decision packages and things of general interest. We have a position in there, and BTS, the data technology operation, had a variety of packages at our first go, and we eliminated most of those, had some realignments within, and as we get off the mainframe, that hopefully will be off the mainframe, there are some like 2 positions involved, and we reassigned those to do some things that were needed within BTS rather than looking for new positions. But the one new position that's in there relates to data security emergency preparedness. It's a technology disaster planning analyst. We had a temporary spot there we tried to hire, and that's very difficult evidently to hire in that area, certainly for a temporary spot. And I think the CBO recommendation is, since we haven't hired someone, to go ahead and contract, which may be the best option from where we sit. But in the long run, I suspect we'll come back with that, because that's an ongoing function, and it's a position that I think made it through the variety of things as number 1 in BTS. So I'm just alerting you that we're going to have to do something with that. And if it's contract right now, but I think you're probably going to see that position again. The other item that's big within the data security that you know something about is our PCI, payment card industry. And that's becoming bigger and more complex. We originally thought that we could accomplish something, and we are going to, and you have approved a gateway that evidently is going to be clear in terms of how we use the sensitive data and not compromise it. And that's an okay solution for some people. For PBOT, that is something that we'll be using. But related to transactions, we have something like 9 to 10 million transactions. And because of parking meters, PBOT has 70% of those, 75%, something like that. So I'm raising this not for our budget because it's going to be paid for by the users, but it represents something like 700,000 or 800,000 to the Transportation Bureau that will cost. And I just plant that because that's a significant budget item, and I think it's of interest to Bureau of Transportation and to you. And I don't know the flexibility on that, and it may be parking meter revenues could be changed, but in any case, that's a big item. But I'm raising it not just because of that, because in our analysis of conforming to the PCI requirements, and then if we finally got all the rocks turned over and the analysis done, there's a very big job there. And if we're trying to fix all of our systems, including voice and where we take credit card information, I was told we needed something like 27 people and $1.7 million. So not all those being permanent, which didn't strike me as the right answer. Because right now we're doing PCI 3.0, and it keeps changing. And we might be able to conform to 3.0, but next year it's going to be 3.1, and there are more stuff to do. So our conclusion, and we've had some meeting with our customer agencies, is that one way or another, we need everybody to get on a gateway that would be encrypted so that we would not be compromising the personal information. And the different bureaus that are looking at that could use the gateway that you have, but there may be better ways to do it. And I know there's a serious concern about customer service. If you get a call in a water bureau, for example, and they want to pay a bill and you say, just a minute, we need to forward you to someone else, or revenue. And I think revenue is concerned that once that you lose them, maybe they don't want to talk to you again if it has to do with paying money. So what I think BDS, revenue, water all need to think through what's the appropriate gateway, but there's the thought that we as an organization are probably not going to get into fixing all of our systems to be compliant and then find a little while later it's more money to be compliant. And I think it's going to be less expensive to go to an outside gateway. So I plant that partially to raise the transportation issue and to indicate you've taken care of, as a council, the gateway in one sense, but the other bureaus are trying to say, how do we minimize the impact on our customers? The next item that I wanted to mention, and it's in our document under the heading of equity and opportunity, there were 2 decision packages, and one of them, we made the decision, and you would see this in the spring bump, the onboarding position that we had for 1 year, this current year we're in, has been very successful. We've got a program now for OMF on onboarding new employees, and we've shown the materials to other bureaus, and there's a component where they can plug in their own information. There's some things common to all, but it is a popular item and it's gone well, and I've been involved with a lot of employees. Every new employee, we have a session where I get a chance to talk. And you can see that it is something that works well, and we want to continue. We did not come up with offsetting savings for that position, and you will see in the spring bump what we'd like to do is do some carryover of funds that we have through vacancy savings and is funded, to fund it for next year. And that's coming a separate angle, but I wanted to mention it because it's in this package. So with that, we have a solution for that, but you obviously have to agree with the solution. But I think it's a good program and something we should continue. The other position in there relates to hiring disabled people. Anna would argue, and I could let her argue if you'd like, that we're not providing all the services that we'd like to and that the Disability Commission would like, but we don't have offsetting savings, so it is sitting there as one that we wouldn't fund now. We'd continue the services, but at a lower level than Anna would like and that I think Disability Commission would like. And I believe there is someone from the Disability Commission here that sometime in your 40 minutes you could hear from if you'd like to. There are 3 packages in here that are revenue generating packages that I think are not controversial and don't need lots of discussion, that CBO has recommended actually for 2 of them. One of them is the continuation of this IRS data exchange that got funded originally through innovation grants, and now we're asking for the next step, and it is going to be a revenue raising issue, and I think makes sense. And there's another one for auditing franchise agreements that is a revenue raising issue that made sense to us and to CBO. There was an item that wasn't agreed to by CBO related to legal services. City attorney said because of all the work that's going on in the revenue division, there's a lot of legal talent that's needed, and there was a look for some funding there that I think wasn't approved. We're probably going to do what we need to, whether we have that or not, because it's something that we have to have in terms of some of those revenue measures. But I think the revenue generating packages are not especially controversial. The last item I wanted to mention, and then we can go wherever you'd like, is the innovation program, which again isn't in our budget. And I wasn't here when the presentations were made to the council last week, but I find that one really successful in where we are right now. And we're still learning and moving with that, but you've seen examples of both the larger grants and the micro grants. And we've had close to 100 proposals coming in, and then many have been approved to do some things that I think are significant. And we're looking right now in the spring bump to do something with a carryover of the remainder of the funds that aren't used within the $1 million that is in that fund, so that we could do another round of micro grants in May. So you're going to see that in a different venue, but I just put that pitch in for something not in our budget because I think the innovation program is doing some things that it should be doing. And that really gets me through the compilation of decision packages and gives you an exposure to what we're doing, and it's within about 1 minute of the 20 minutes.
Get from there. Questions?
I was curious, you mentioned using vacancy savings to, on which position was it again?
The onboarding position.
Which is like new employee orientation, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's training and orientation, but yes.
Are there other vacancy savings at your disposal?
I bet there are, but we spent some on a related to mentor protege program and prime contractor training in sort of the MBE, WBE area because there's interest to do that better right now within procurement. I don't know that I've got anything, I can get you the answer to that, but we're not sitting on a pile of savings, but that we had that and we thought this is an important enough position for us that this would be a way to handle it. And so it doesn't just take money out of HR to fund that, but reaches in other parts of OMF to make it work.
Yeah, I'd be curious in seeing it just across the entire agency since it is such a big agency and a lot of flux going on. So I'd be curious to know that.
We can get that to you. I don't know if that's probably a better, we'll get back to you.
Yeah,
but we
that's
can do
fine.
that. I'm sure someone's writing all this down, so I won't.
Just a simple question. How many full-time employees do you have?
If I said 650, I'd be close. Yeah.
Thank you.
So with a budget of about over 400 million, I'm surprised that there aren't any realignment packages or very many realignment packages, and also that you asked for a number of one-time funding positions, presumably so that you didn't have to provide an offset. So and looking at all these positions, I don't have any proposed savings within the Bureau other than what you just mentioned with vacancy savings.
A number, I'll deal with the 400 million piece, but the number of the one-time positions, how many of those do we have? 3? Two general fund, okay. Well, but let me deal with the 400 million because that's a big number. But if you look at the health fund, for example, that doesn't relate to positions. I mean, it relates to insurance. If you look at the risk fund, we've got some big funds there that we're carrying over that really aren't programmatic in the way we usually think of people and expenditures. So, we've got some reserve funding for buildings. For example, what we're pulling the 3.7 million out of to do the design, and those again is not something that I take those reserves and buy positions.
So that actually leads me to my next question. At the table, it says the contingency in this year's budget is 111 million, and in the requested is 144 million. What's that contingency for?
I'll bring up the right person.
Good afternoon, or good morning. Aaron Beck with the Office of Management and Finance of Business. Aaron Beck, Business Operations. The contingency figure that you see there in the overall summary budget includes a number of the things that Fred talked about in terms of like replacement balances that we're carrying over, major maintenance project balances that we're carrying over, because we collect money from the bureaus on an annual basis to fund these replacement and major maintenance programs, and we don't spend it all in 1 year, and so it carries over in our balance and shows up in that contingency account. And that's separate from the contingencies that we have for things like operating reserves. The other thing that we have in there that's a large dollar amount our actuarial reserves for our insurance funds.
So why is it jumping, why is the requested budget jumping 33 million in the contingency line item?
I think I'll have to get back to you on that one. I'm not sure exactly.
There are so many different bureaus within this one bureau. I almost think that we should have another work session to look at it. And I'd be really interested to know about your budget advisory committee process. One of my personal interests is the Office for Community Technology, having previously been in charge of it when it was a standalone bureau. And I know that the bureau and its advisors have been, particularly the Mount Hood Regulatory Commission and others, have been looking at digital inclusion. And I'm wondering why there isn't a proposal to further that. I think there was an innovation grant funding that didn't get funded, but can you tell me how you arrived at which positions to put forward?
That one, in terms of the regular process, obviously didn't make the cut. It was an innovation funding proposal and didn't make the cut.
For the position, the ongoing position for the digital inclusion officer, how come that didn't make the cut of what you put forward?
I don't know what, I don't have a great answer for that because I don't have all of them laid out and saying there's another expert. I've got him surrounded by experts. But it's a long process, as you say, with lots of different bureaus and positions. And I can't remember what was at the cusp and Thomas.
Good morning. I'm Thomas Lanham with the Revenue Division. I don't recall there being an ask.
Maybe it was just discussed to the commission then. So in terms of, it's kind of difficult for me to figure out all of these one-time requests. Can I look to the City Budget Office for guidance as to if these had been ongoing requests, would you have recommended differently?
I may not understand the question.
Well, it looks to me that the OMF is requesting over $750,000 in one-time general fund resources to cover staffing positions that actually are ongoing rather than one-time. And I believe most of your analysis was this is not really a one-time request, if I might summarize.
I think that was part of it. It may not have been all of it. Jeremy, I don't know if you have.
I think that the largest portion, the positions, I think, are a smaller portion of that 750. So the biggest portion is that IRS data exchange program, which is the 550,000 of that. So think of the two smaller ones, the training analyst. Probably now we probably still want to find some savings within OMF, which is what they've come forward with, and then on the disabilities position, recruitment position. That's another one where I think when that resolution first came forward, it was stated that there wouldn't be an additional cost implementing this program. So we probably wouldn't change the recommendation on that one either.
Okay, thanks. So going to the data exchange, that's 540,500, and the Revenue Bureau received 295,000 in one-time funding from the Innovation Fund to fund the data exchange program. So now the request is for one-time funding, including an FTE, but it's really an ongoing need. So I'm wondering, why did you say yes to the one-time? And also I'm concerned that the Innovation Fund was supposedly for making savings, and here we're now faced with because that was funded, we're now looking at $500,000 in ongoing.
It's another one of those, first of all, we'd probably want to see if the program actually did come forward with the revenues that they say they will come forward with. That's one of the things. I mean, a lot of these positions that start off in the Revenue Bureau, and Thomas might even want to come up and talk a little bit more about it, but these positions, when they come forward, we want to make sure that they're actually bringing in the revenue. So in the past, they brought forward a lot of auditor positions, a lot of delinquent collections positions. It's nice to have a year or two to see if these positions are bringing forth that revenue before we do make that an ongoing program.
So the Innovation Fund was kickstarting funding for this program. The $295,000 is spent out to get the program up and running. When the original innovation request was made, we signaled there was ongoing cost to this program. And so here we are talking about the ongoing cost. The reason it was put together as a one-time ask is that we want to make sure that the revenues prove out. I've got a very high degree of confidence that they will. We don't need to see much of a compliance increase to see substantial increases in general fund revenues. So I believe we'll be back here next year for a permanent ask, but we won't actually know what the revenues are until the back end of FY 15-16.
And then my last question is about the, again, it's directed to the City Budget Office about the OMF managed facilities and the major maintenance gap. And your recommendation is to consider interagency rate increases to close the funding gap. That's really asking the bureaus to fund this in, so it's asking the bureaus to take a cut, possibly in their own major maintenance capacity.
Well, with any of the internal service funds, they're all funded with interagencies between the bureaus. So what we have done in the past, and it's up to the council decision, is to backfill some of those general fund bureaus with an increase in general fund in order to pay for the increase in interagency rates. But as far as with the other funds, with the BES, water, PBOT, a lot of times they will have to absorb those within current rates or increase rates.
Yeah, and just to follow up, I think that is an important point, getting back to the infrastructure conversation we had to kick off, is that with this infrastructure gap and with the report that came to council last fall on the bump, solving this is going to require some of those trade-offs, and it's going to require some of those offsets. And so as Jeremy said, we can, to the extent there's general fund available and council wants to dedicate it, we can backfill some of those general fund expenses, but making serious progress against that backlog is going to require some realignment of existing programs.
Fred, can I do a quick lightning round with you on your dashboard?
Sure.
Because you have this is a pretty comprehensive and I think sophisticated set of benchmarks, and I just want to, I've got 4 I want to ask you just a lightning round questions on, starting with percentage of OMF-owned city facilities maintained in good condition. My first question is, why under your stewardship have we seen a 1/3 drop in the condition of our assets?
That's a great question, and the real thing there on footage is the Portland building.
Yeah, so, okay, that's the key change. Under the chart that has our general obligation bond rating, is that uniquely the CFO's responsibility to track that and monitor any concerns about changes in the market?
I don't know what to think in terms of uniquely the CFOs. I mean, it's in the CFO responsibility to look at that.
Who in the organization, if there's any looming threat to our bond rating, which is enormously important to being able to get cheap debt, who in the organization is most responsible for that?
CFO.
Okay. On the MWESB chart, very strong numbers. What we often get asked, however, is how does it break out in the different categories? For example, PDC once upon a time, it was heavier on women and emerging small business than minorities. So for our purposes, is there a way to chart that so we can see the 3 subcategories?
Sure.
And then finally, on the percentage of PCI requirements satisfied for the city's electronic payment gateway, my recollection is that when the report came out within the last 6 months, some of the alleged deficiencies were technical in nature, but they get lumped in so that the message is we're falling short, but it might literally be paperwork compliance or some technical compliance. Of the 20% that you are identifying to get up to the 100%, to get from 81 to 100%, do you have a rough sense of how many of those are in the nature of sort of technical specifications and how many are the kind of substantive things that are going to require resources and attention?
I don't have the direct answer to that, except there's something like 280 different requirements, and if you fail on one, you fail on them all. So it doesn't matter if it's technical or substantive.
Right.
But having said that, the next point's slipping.
Well,
not that I didn't listen closely to you.
I mean, I think the public concern here is not so much that you haven't checked the box or you haven't got a form in triplicate. Is the system, the integrity of the system, is there a sufficient firewall? Can they use the system knowing their information is not going to be compromised? Versus some of the more technical things you have to do for which, as you pointed out, you get dinged, you're out of compliance if any one of them doesn't. What's your sense in terms of the ratio of things that are actually substantive and versus more procedural?
I grew up with that, but what we found that's where I was going to go before and it slipped. And looking at to fix all of this, needing 26 people and 1.7 million, basically said, if you touch this system anywhere, it's then in jeopardy. So if you have a telephone system over here and your computer system here is connected, that's a problem. And that's why we're getting into gateways to get us out of the business, really, of using this, the PCI information. Now, that's a pretty substantive thing. There may be some small technical things to get there, but if I were to say it's 80% this paper stuff and 20% technical, the technical things are big enough, we have to do them, I think, to be compliant. So it's a package that's important, and I could find someone to give you an answer on how many are small and how many are larger, but it's a pretty major change in how we do business.
And do we track somewhere the data on all the electronic payments then broken out by bureaus?
I bet we have that.
So we get a sense of where the biggest activity is and therefore potentially some of the biggest risk?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, Madam Auditor, membership. Commissioner Fish, yes, we have a payment gateway tracking system. We have about $158 million that run through that payment gateway, and we have the distribution of all of our bureaus' applications that we can show.
Good to see that. Thank you.
Commissioner, if I could interject, one of the things my team at Xerox does is make sure that our websites are PCI compliant. And I can tell you that it is an ongoing battle as different web ciphers get hacked and cracked, and we're audited monthly, and I think you very much want a specialist handling this and funneling everything through a centralized specialist rather than trying to deal with this on a dispersed basis.
Well, particularly where the city's in the process of encouraging people to use our electronic payment systems more like monthly billing in the Water Bureau and signing up for that. We've got to be able to, with a straight face, say that it's a safe system.
Right. At Xerox, we consider this a brand risk, and we pay a lot of attention to it.
One more question on the dashboard. Maybe I misunderstand. Looking at the percentage of subcontract dollars awarded to minority, women, emerging small businesses, et cetera, you've got a green arrow, and but it seems to be going from 34% down to 22%.
I like that question because I asked that as I saw it. That didn't feel good to me. Evidently, and the answer I got, and I don't know if that's the final answer, is that there's some council policy to get, I think it's 22%. Last year, we got up to something like 35.
It's actually,
Yeah,
the
this is a
numbers are
simple
based on
answer.
the actuals. So if you're looking at the first two columns, the 13, 14, it's a change in those actuals, not the change between what they've actually done and what they think they will be, which are the last three columns.
Right.
Those are the
So
ones that
you're right to flag. You're right to
But
flag it's going the wrong direction. But when you compare 12-13 to 13-14, it went from 22 to 35. Now, Fred may have additional information about targets, but that's specifically why that green arrow is there.
Okay,
Yeah, for those
but
two
you're
years.
hitting, I mean, the question I got was my question is if we got 35 last year, why do we try for 22 next year? That's not the direction. So I understand the green arrow answer, but the answer was, well, that's what the council has established as the goal. I don't know if that's the final answer or not, because I hate to go from 35 to 22. And maybe we can't do 35 year after year.
I have a big, vague question that maybe we'll need Ben back up for, which is, I have a working assumption that governments tend to underinvest in anything related to administration or infrastructure, and I also used to work for Cover Oregon. So I assume that there's some big IT disaster waiting around the corner. And so I just kind of like to get a sense of, are we wildly investing in IT, and do we expect that like at some point in the next year and a half, none of our computers will turn on?
Question with some confidence.
He's really scared, yeah.
Members of the committee, I'm Ben Barry. I'm the Chief Technology Officer, City of Portland. Commissioner Novick, we are under investing in technology in the city. We have taken out over $10 million in our budget over the last 5-6 years in the Bureau of Technology Services. We've cut staff, about 38 staff. And so when we look at things like asking for a disaster recovery analyst, people might say, well, why can't you just handle that with your existing staff? Can't do that. The existing staff is already full up, especially with things like the pavement card industry. And so when we have failures, it's a direct consequence of having underfunded IT, because we're constantly balancing the next best use of the money on behalf of our customers. And I think today, and I would ask Ralph to come up as well, I think we have about a $10 million underfund for our maintenance. Ralph, could you come up? That is spread across data center, networking, the infrastructure of the city.
But Ben, that's a good and loyal answer to the organization, but on a systems and platforms basis, we've been investing quite a bit. I mean, the ITAP system and BDS is just one example. So there are big investment gaps in things like the third floor and the ability to maintain that data after a seismic incident. But in terms of systems and platforms across the bureaus, my sense is that you're relatively current with the pace of available new tools.
Mr. Mayor, yes. If you look at point solutions for our investments, such as ITAP, or what we're doing with other key implementations like the public safety region application, those are right on in terms of the point solutions for a particular bureau. But what I'm referring to for Commissioner Novik's question is the fabric of IT that serves the whole city, where we could improve on that.
So what keeps you up at night? I mean, what could be the consequences of our underinvestment?
Well, the first thing that keeps me up at night today is PCI. You may remember me being on the cameras talking about PCI and becoming compliant by the end of this year. Fred Miller talked about the investment of staff and treasurer that has to go into PCI compliance. And we are literally pulling people away from other projects to be able to be compliant for the city. And so there's a difficult conversation that we have with our customers around what matters most to them in terms of things that we have to pull our staff off of to be able to become compliant. The other thing that really keeps me up at night is the cybersecurity threat overall, because we only have a certain number of cybersecurity analysts, but the bad people with malware are thousands around the world. And so we work on cybersecurity with due diligence as we can, but we're always trying to stay up in front of where the threats are coming. And there are numerous threats throughout the world. And so you witness the targets of the world, the other things you might hear on the news having had breaches. That's the kind of thing that we are working diligently to protect. City has not had a breach on the size of what you see in the paper, but that's the kind of thing that keeps us up at night as a whole bureau, not just the CTO.
And what level of investment we need in cybersecurity for you to sleep better?
Well, I think the first investment really is speaking to what Fred is speaking about around investments in the PCI. We've asked for staff around FTE. I think we asked for 2 staff in our cybersecurity that did not make our cut across all of OMF. But that was our key request for 2 additional cybersecurity people. And those are not in here.
That's actually what I wanted to ask about, which is there are several things, actually 5 listed in the PCI stuff doesn't get its own bullet, but in their analysis that they identified as sort of very important to citywide priorities that didn't make it into decision packages for you guys. And their recommendation here is that there's a danger that these projects won't be funded and that, because they're not in decision packages. Is it your intent, were these decision packages that were cut, or is it your intent that they might be decision packages that will be brought before council for review? Was this an offset issue, or? That's more a question for Fred, I think.
The 2 that you're mentioning, if I have my history right, aren't those what we tried to handle through realignments from the positions that were made available by going off the mainframe. Because that originally was a package, and rather than trying to increase the charges to customers, we thought there's a way to reallocate, and I believe that's what happened with those.
The 5 that are listed are the Portland State University City of Portland Joint Building Project, the MWESB Compliance Monitoring Coordinated Campsite Cleanup, Facilities Resource Management Coordinator position, and the Data Disaster Recovery Site. So are those all the ones that you were talking about being covered through realignment? Because it didn't sound like it.
I'd have to go back through there in order, but let's take campsite cleanup. That's something that we started last year, and we attempted to fund that with OMF to get it going. And then this year, we said to the various client agencies, because it's not really our program as much as people who own property, like water, transportation, parks, and so on, where the cleanup takes place. And we asked those agencies to, if they would fund their share, and got about halfway there. So that package basically made it to the mayor's office and said, you can either allocate those funds from the agencies and make that an ongoing program or not, because we don't have the funding from the agencies, and I don't have the ability to say to parks or others, put the money in. The mayor's budget could do that.
So maybe this is a mechanics issue then. So if that were going to be a decision package, is the expectation that we would see it coming from the mayor's office then? Yeah. Okay.
We discussed yesterday where it fell below the line of what a bureau was able to recommend with an offset, but could still be selected for the mayor's proposed.
Do we want to hear from our Budget Advisory Committee members? Okay.
Sure, question, thank you. On your KPMs, you're measuring percentage of facilities in good condition. Is accessibility a component of that? And how are we tracking the implementation of the transition plan within either the KPMs or KPIs, or how is that being tracked in OMF?
I think in our other performance measures, I could show you something. In these, I don't, in the key performance measures, I don't have that.
Okay. Is accessibility a component of a building in good condition, or the transition plan implementation and modifications a part of that as well, or?
I don't know, and I think it should be. I can't tell you in terms of the condition rating system how accessibility is handled. There's Bob, who could tell you.
Good morning, Bob Keita, Facility Services. The condition index report is something that is going to actually evaluate all the buildings, and the ADA transition plan is one of the components that is reviewed. And for example, the Portland building, whenever we have projects, ADA plan is consulted and all those things are included, so that we include the work of ADA and removing barriers as we do all projects.
So that's tracked throughout?
We're actually working with your office to
Danielle,
develop a tracking procedure, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the first one, in terms of using the BHR's focused outreach program, I'm guessing it's a new indicator, so therefore there's no previous. I guess, one, is there some, where did the number 75% come from? Is there some guesstimate on the baseline of who does it now? And I thought that there was going to be a request for a position within the focused outreach program. Was that a bump, or did it not come through, or where?
Let's let Anna talk about
that. Thank you. Anna Canwit, Director of the Bureau of Human Resources. Yes, we are still looking for a position to assist with a focused outreach. If the decision package is approved on the program specialist position, to fully implement the resolution that the city become a model employer of persons with disabilities, one of the functions of that position would be to assist in focused outreach. Right now, I only have 0.75% of a position I can dedicate to that, and our goal is to have bureaus use that program well before we post, because by the time we post a recruitment, it's really late to start doing outreach to communities of color, disabled people, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of the function of that position would be to add needed capacity and also to reach a population we really haven't been very active in actually recruiting from, in part because, again, although initially I think the thinking was that resolution could be fully adopted without additional funding with budget cuts with an I Bureau, that's become increasingly clear that we cannot.
So if you meet the goal of 75%, do you have the capacity to really do that at this point?
Probably not. But I think it's certainly an aspiration, and one of the things, frankly, that we'll be using this measurement for is to go out in our work to market the program to bureaus, that it is important, this is why, and almost a cheerleader if we really want to get to the 75%.
Thank you.
You want to ask that? Go ahead.
Oh. Just since I'm here, one request. Travis Wall, who's with the Portland Commission on Disabilities, is here. I don't know if you'd like to hear from him on this package.
But we'd also like to hear from your BAC members that are here as well. From Travis as well, and your BAC members who are here.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, others. Again, I'm Travis Wall, and I'm the Chair of the Employment Committee of the Portland Commission on Disabilities. And as many, if not all of you know, several years back, we brought a resolution forward to the city for the city to become a model employer of people with disabilities. There is a tremendous gap between what we are as a city, where roughly 15 to 18% of us are people with disabilities, and the city's workforce, which is roughly comprised of 2 to 4% of people with disabilities. And for a whole variety of reasons, including wanting the city to serve as a model to other employers in the region, the city being one of the largest employers in the area, as well as wanting to see the city live up to its responsibilities and the promise of the ADA, you adopted that resolution. I might share with you that in the process of adopting that resolution, you also adopted a white paper that we had developed in studying this issue over the preceding 2 years. And that white paper did indicate that there might well be a need for additional staff to help carry this out, and specifically the position that we're talking about today. So it comes as no surprise to us, as we've worked with the Bureau of Human Resources and the Office of Equity and Human Rights over the past several years to bring this resolution forward, that we in fact do need staff to help carry this out. While we very much appreciate the efforts of Bureau Director Anna Canowit and Director Dante James, we need more. And I believe we've shared this in conversations we've had with a number of you over the past couple of years. So we wholeheartedly support this proposal and hope that you will take it up.
So can I just ask, the resolution that council adopted, and I think it was mentioned earlier, the fiscal impact that went with that resolution said there would be no additional cost to the city. And I don't think the intent of that was to say there would be no additional effort. I think the intent was from council, and maybe I'm reading into it, but their legislative intent would it be funded within existing resources. Was that talked about at the time? And is this an issue of sort of prioritization within those existing resources?
Well, I guess I would say several things. I think one is that there was we were in a different economic environment when this resolution was brought forward, and I think cold hard political facts were that in order to get the resolution forward, we agreed at that point that additional staff were not needed at that point. Again, I would point out that the white paper did specifically address this issue. The white paper was adopted as a part of the resolution. So we always anticipated that we would have to look at this. We kept our minds open, and we endeavored to work with the resources that were available at that point and the resources that we've had since then. But once again, there's a historical inequity here, a very significant one. And if we're going to address it meaningfully, it's going to require some effort. And again, that is something we have shared, as again, I've said just moments ago, in conversations we've had with the mayor and with other commissioners. So this is not a surprise to us.
And if I could augment that answer as the chief sponsor of that resolution, as Travis said, it was in hard times and we wanted to get started. We didn't want to wait until the recovery to do this. And I really appreciate Anna and her staff having actually allocated resources to do what they've been able to do. Most programs, or many programs, as they develop, then need more staff. And it's become very obvious to me as we've implemented the equity initiative throughout the bureaus that indeed we do need more dedicated staff, because otherwise, if this is one on a long list of things that is a staff person's responsibility, it doesn't often rise to the top. And so I'll be supporting this particular ask, because I do think that having someone dedicated to this work is crucial.
So BAC folks. We have David and Catherine, and I bet they can finish in 4 minutes because that would be the 1 hour we have.
Good morning, I'm David Schaff. I'm the director of the Portland Water Bureau. I'm one of the 6 non-OMF Bureau representatives of the OMF BAC, along with a couple members of your staff, and then labor and community members. And the 6 non-OMF bureaus are the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, Fire, Police, Housing, Bureau of Development Services, and Water. So we make up a very large portion of the customer base of OMF. There are just 2 points that I'd like to make today as a member of the OMF Budget Advisory Committee. The first is the Portland building needs to be renovated. The customer service bureaus have a need for employee workspace in a building that has both seismic and water intrusion problems addressed. I have employees who are handed out what we call windowsill cozies that are intended to soak up the water when the rain comes and reflect or dissipate the heat when it's a hot summer day. I have employees who, when their windows are leaking, are told, well, just don't use that part of your desk that the water's coming in on. That's a problem. I also need to make sure that not just the building survives long enough for everybody to get out, but we need to have a building that is able to do its job when the disaster is over and we're in post-recovery stage. And the Portland building is not that building right now. That's the first point. The second point, and Fred touched about this in his very first comment, I believe, the OMF budget development process included very robust customer input, and I worked on what was robust. Were we obnoxious? Were we loud? No, we were just robust. We talked a lot about what are the requests, and we pushed back and we said, can't you do this some other way? Can't you do things through realignment? And we did that because we were concerned that all of the financial impact of the requests that Fred described before they got narrowed down would have had a significant impact on the general fund bureaus and then on bureaus such as mine as far as putting pressure on rates or pressure on our budgets to cut our key performance levels. And I'm very pleased that Fred and his team took the effort and made the effort to narrow down the list of packages to submit that provided us the ability to support the overall package going forward, knowing that there are compromises and knowing that you're going to have tough decisions to make. Thank you.
I'm Catherine Ryland. I'm the fiscal manager of the Police Bureau. My comments are not much different than David's. He's probably saying them more eloquent than me. But I do want to commend the process this year. I think we did have really good conversations. The bureaus were able to discuss the impacts to their own budgets with each package, and I do think they did a great job at OMF of boiling them all down and submitting a good request, and so we were in favor of their packages. Thank you.
How many citizens served on the Budget Advisory Committee?
Do you want to answer? Because I actually have the answer, but
There were 3, one who didn't show often, and then one of them who's spending lots of time emailing back and forth with Commissioner Novick, Robert McCullough.
So I just want to remind everyone that as of next year, the PIEX guidelines, there was a 4-year phase-in period, but I believe next year that there needs to be a majority of citizens on all budget advisory committees. So for something like OMF, which is so complex, and I really appreciate the input from the customers within the city. I think that's also crucial. It's probably going to mean some advanced training for citizen members coming in next year to make sure that they're not completely lost and are able to participate.
I was just going to say, I'd be concerned about our ability to get people to volunteer for that particular budget advisory committee, because I just don't know that there's that widespread interest in administration. So obviously we need to strive to hit the target, but I would think that Fred might need some help recruiting volunteers.
Well, the fact that we have 4 budget advisors sitting here day in, day out, hours and hours, gives me hope that there are people who are willing to dive into immensely complex subjects. I'm not suggesting I'm signing you up for their committee. Don't. There are folks who, I mean, you look at the numbers and you look at all of the interesting things, technology and community technology and various other things that OMF does. I think that there will be people, but it's going to take all. I have found from my budget advisory committees that sometimes it does take specific outreach and explaining to folks, here's why I want you to be involved and here's what you can add to the process. And so I just want to mention that up front, because it's not something that you can just, post a notice on the front of your webpage and expect 100 applications.
So, we will do whatever is necessary, but it is very valuable to us to deal with our customers, and from the number of agencies who have external customers, the citizens have more direct impact. Our customers are all internal, basically, and we can add citizens to it, but we have to continue to find ways to tap our customers for their information. It could be a separate process, but.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Okay. We have one big controversial bureau left.
One day I'm going to move down there. Yes, it is. This is the moment that.
Can I sit here?
No, you cannot sit here. Yeah. I don't understand why everyone left. I thought they were here for the budget office. Just waiting. So we only have 15 minutes scheduled, but of course we'll be here as long as the questions go on. But I will be relatively brief. The city budget office, total requested base budget, and you can see in here, and I should note, we do a very short review of the city budget office, although we do note right up front that obviously it is difficult to make recommendations, objective recommendations about our own bureau, so we don't really pretend to do that. I think we try and provide information, but sort of recognize that conflict right up front. The total base budget for the city budget office in 2015-16 is just under $2 million, $1.988 million. That includes 12 permanent FTE, 1 limited term analyst, and 1 Hatfield fellow. And there are 3 decision packages that we've put forward for this budget. The first of which is $1 million for new brass budgeting software. This is something, I think it's the 3rd year in a row we've put it on, so I think the committee and council are familiar with this request. Our existing budget software is unsupported. It does work fine right now, but it is unsupported, and so to the extent it breaks, we will need to replace it, and we'll need to replace it very quickly. We did put it through the asset management process, and you'll see it ranked 18th out of 21 projects, again with a relatively low asset management risk score. And again, the reason for that is that it is working right now. As a result of that, we don't recommend council allocate funding to this project because of all the other things that are on the list that are higher priority. I do think it highlights, though, just a need in the city. And really, it highlights the asset management backlog and the problem that creates is that we have so many things that are high priority. We're not able to get to that second and third tier of projects. And this project will, when it breaks, and I hope that's not until we've been able to come up with a plan to fund it. When it does break, it will go up that list very dramatically and very quickly because most of your bureaus will have to start doing their budgets on spreadsheets, and they will not be very happy about the time spent to do that. But again, it's an important issue. It does not rank very high and is not recommended at this time. The second request, and the one I'll spend a little bit of time on, is a request for a senior management analyst position. So the city budget office, as I mentioned, we have 12 permanent positions, 1 limited term and 1 Hatfield fellow. In the 2013-14 budget, this was the big reductions that occurred in bureaus throughout the city. We did reduce an FTE. We lost a senior economist position, and we transferred the work of that position to others within the office. Some of it went to the city economist and some to other analysts in the office. And so that is sort of the historical context. And over the last really 18 to 24 months, we've been implementing the performance management system that you've seen through the dashboards and some of the other efforts that have been happening. And this is a very, I think it's a very valuable process. It is very time intensive. There's a lot of outreach involved. There's a lot of coordination with bureaus. The data visualization hopefully looks good. When it gets to you, it takes quite a bit of time to get it to that point. And what I've done over the last sort of year and a half to 2 years is really shifted existing analysts that we have in the office away from some of the core budget work over to that performance management work. And I think that was a very good short-term trade-off. And as the director of the budget office and in talking to the mayor's office, we felt that it was important enough to get this system off the ground and really to sort of re-engage, create this performance-based culture in the city, or at least start down that path. And I think that was a valuable trade-off and one that I was willing to make. But the things we've taken some of those analysts away from are sort of the core budget analysis, the monitoring and tracking of what's going on a monthly basis in their bureaus, the site visits out to the bureaus, the deeper dives into some of the programs, meeting some of the line staff, et cetera. And I don't think that is sustainable in the long run. I think that we are going to run into an issue here of that trade-off of do we continue building the performance management system and turning it into something even more robust. And I really hope we do. And I can talk about that a little bit because I think it's really valuable. Or do we sort of go back to some of those core functions? And so that's really the genesis of asking for the senior management analyst position. Funding of that position would allow us to continue and expand on that work, specifically thinking about some of the monthly performance check-ins, which if you look at other cities that are a lot further along than we are, this is a really key component of their performance management system, are these monthly check-ins where they're bringing bureaus in. And again, bureaus are cycling through, so they're not there every month, but maybe they're there every quarter. And they're being asked questions, and very similar to the questions that you've all asked during this process about these KPMs. Are we tracking the right things? What does the data look like? And what can we do to help improve the situation? And so I think the position would really help with that. And again, would help making these dashboards even more interactive. I think you'll see when you see these online, there's a lot of data behind this. And the goal here is that a citizen can go on, can look at this dashboard, can actually hover over one of these, can click on it. It will then take you to the bureau, more detailed information. And, you know, as Katie's pointed out, she said, well, what about, you know, should we break this measure down into other components? The goal is that that would actually happen. So you would see this measure, you'd click on it, you'd see the components of it, you could click on those and get even further. And again, I think this position would help with that. I did offer up an offset because we are requesting an ongoing position. The offset I offered up was to eliminate the limited term position and the Hatfield Fellow position that are in my office. I don't recommend that offset because I have found those, the limited term and the Hatfield Fellow positions, incredibly useful to allow flexibility in hiring. Again, it's a small office. It's a small office of professional analysts. I do lose 1 to 2 people a year. They go on to bigger and better things. Hopefully, we're able to keep them in the city of Portland. Sometimes they go to other governments outside of the city. And so in sort of managing that, the Hatfield Fellow Program, I would highly recommend that to every bureau in the city. It is incredibly cost effective. $35,000 and you get someone for 32 hours a week for 8 months. And we've had 3 Hatfield Fellows, all of which have been just phenomenal. And the limited term position allows me, again, to bring in people often straight out of graduate school on more of a trial basis. And if they work out then and someone else leaves, it sort of creates that pipeline. So that's really the reason why I would not recommend that offset, although we did put it on the table for discussion. And if the senior management analyst for performance management is not funded, I would actually like to keep that limited term position in Hatfield Fellow to keep that flexibility. And then I would probably, in turn, if it's not funded, either scale back on the program management implementation or scale back on the budget analysis or do a little bit of both. And we do that in consultation with council in terms of what the impact of that is. The very last package I would talk about is a utility analyst position, and this is coming out of the Blue Ribbon Commission. Again, the Mayor and Commissioner Fish impaneled a Blue Ribbon Commission to look at the governance and management of the city's utilities. One of the recommendations coming out of that is to create a public utility board, and the suggestion of that Blue Ribbon Commission was that that public utility board be staffed by a new position located within the city budget office. So again, we've included that request in here, really at the request of the Blue Ribbon Commission. I know council has not yet, I think, formally taken action on those recommendations, but that position is funded with water and sewer resources and would be solely dedicated to, again, staffing the public utility board and looking at utility issues.
So that's one person for $200,000?
So the recommendation from the utility board is an additional position in addition to the existing staff. So we have about 1 FTE dedicated to water and sewer analysis now. This would fund an additional position, and that's the fully loaded cost, including sort of the internal bureau overhead, is being loaded into that cost. We have a further breakdown. I don't know if you have it with you or not.
I do. So the fully loaded cost of the position, it's a principal financial analyst, so it's at about $150,000 for a fully loaded with benefits for that level of an analyst. There's a little bit of M&S in there, and then there's about $48,000 of the administrative overhead for the office, which is a portion of Andrew's time, a portion of my time, a portion of space rent, et cetera, that water and sewer would pay for that position.
We did have some discussion about whether it should be a principal financial analyst or a senior financial analyst. And again, that may be a conversation when council takes up these recommendations again. I think we are more likely to get someone who has the utilities background that the Blue Ribbon Commission was looking for at the principal level. But that's not to say we couldn't find someone at the senior level, which again would save a little bit of cost.
Andrew, how many Hatfield Fellows do we have?
In the city?
No, well, either in the program or here.
So I just have one in my office.
Right, and there's one in government.
And there's one in government relations. And I think there are only about 25 a year out of PSU, 20 to 25, and they are throughout government, throughout Oregon. But I think the city has at least 2 or 3 and may have more than that. And then the last thing I would just note in terms of our dashboard, because doing performance management for administrative functions is very difficult, and it always has been. And when you read the literature, it's one of the more challenging aspects. And the position we took on this, and really, again, we sort of wanted to set an example for some of the other bureaus. But you will see that the measures that we have on here, with the exception of the second one, the CBO customer service rating, that obviously is within our control in terms of the types of customer service we provide. And we do a survey every year on that to get feedback from our bureau customers and from council as well. But the other 3 measures really are things that are outside of our control. But I think they're really important to have on our dashboard. And one of them is the annual repair, rehabilitation, and replacement funding gap. So this is the gap we talked about at the asset management session right at the very beginning. And the other one related to that is the third one, the percentage of CIP funding that's expended on repair, rehabilitation, and replacement. Obviously, those are not decisions that the city budget office makes. They're decisions that bureaus make, and they're decisions that council makes. But when we thought about what is the purpose of a budget process, and our job is to manage the budget process and performance management system in the city, and the purpose of a budget process is to ensure effective, sustainable, resilient finances, operations, et cetera, into the future. And these were 2 measures that seemed really relevant today to the situation we're in. And I think what they generate is, to the extent that first measure, say the funding gap, continues to rise, we hope that you're asking us, what in the budget process are you doing? What processes do you have in place? What information are you providing that is helping both understand that issue and potentially bring it down? And so I would be able to point back to things like the ranking process that we started this year, and sort of bringing all these projects through that ranking process, so that hopefully the resources we are spending are going to those highest priority assets. And the percentage of CIP funding, again, that hopefully we're having those conversations both internally and with council to make sure that we are spending money on our existing assets as much as we can before expanding the system and adding new O&M components. And the last one I actually love, and I was very reluctant as the Bureau Director. My staff brought this to me and I said, there's no way I want to be held responsible for whether other bureaus are meeting their KPMs. And yet, the argument started as an argument, became a discussion, and then became a resolution that we're going to do this, is that is the goal of a performance management process. The goal of it is that these KPMs are going to show positive year-over-year results, and that if they're not doing that, then there's something wrong in the process we're running. And it may not be my fault. I may come back to you and say, well, gosh, look at what these bureaus did. It's I can explain to you why, but it really is the goal of what we're doing here. And so they convinced me that this really is, and I now am a true believer that this is something that should be on our dashboard. And again, I think as we're talking about these dashboards for all bureaus, we've been sort of trying to encourage bureaus to take this approach of what is your ultimate goal? What is the benefit that you're providing to the public, and how can we measure that? And with that, I will stop talking because I'm well
Andrew, I
over
think
my
though
15.
that's a great, you provided a perfect rationale for why we should scrap any KPM that starts with a history of 100%. Because you can't show any progress. And if it's at 100%, I'm guessing it's not something that is as urgent as something where it starts at a lower number and there's a stretch goal.
Yeah, no, and I think we read that in the literature as well, in the performance management literature. So making sure that the measures are relevant to the decisions being made.
I wonder, because if you have an economic downturn, you may have a measure where you've been at 100%, but you're going to set your budget target at 80.
And I think in some ways, again, the dashboard, the KPMs on the dashboard are not and should not be the only things being tracked. And so it's not that these measures that are 100%, maybe they should continue to be tracked by the Bureau. But again, to the extent that they expect to be there, you may want to, they should be tracked, and if they're going to go down to 80, it may even be elevated as a conversation. But what you want is that whatever it's relevant to the decisions that need to be made in that particular year. So you're sort of seeing what the impact is going to be. That's the theory.
I couldn't help but think when I was looking at your sensitivity to what other bureaus are doing with the KPMs, that if there is an economic downturn, and there will be at some point, how important it is for bureaus to set those targets commensurate with the new budget reality, right? Because the numbers may go down, but as long as they go down in line with expectations or something like that, you won't be butchered here.
And that's a key part of performance management is it really shouldn't be seen as a way to to go after bureaus as sort of a gotcha exercise, which is not to say there may not be an example, right, where you sort of say, well, why have you failed to do this, and what is that, and hold the bureau accountable for that. But that's not the overriding goal. The overriding goal is really to have that discussion. Did you set the target high enough, right? Are we, or in a downturn during a cut period, are we being realistic about what we can achieve? And what do we as a council, as a budget committee, as bureau management need to do to turn it around if it's going in the wrong direction? And it may very well be more resources. It may government relations may come back in and say, look, we weren't able, to achieve the legislative agenda we were trying to achieve because we didn't have the administrative staff, and which is something that they've asked for, and they may be able to tie those things together. That may be the ultimate outcome of a good performance management system.
So I have a comment. And when I look at your dashboard, it looks like, and this sounds a little harsh, but I'm just going to say it this way. It looks like the purpose of the city budget is to repair old buildings. So I guess what I would like to see is a measure of the, you know, like, I guess it's the whole and the whole that isn't, the thing that isn't there, that needs to be there. And that's, you know, what I advocate for all the time is infrastructure in East Portland that doesn't exist. And so when I look at this, I see billions of dollars of things that need to be repaired and nothing about taking care of the needs of, you know, a quarter of our citizens. So I just, I guess I kind of caused me to flare a little bit there. So you know, that's all I have to say.
Maybe we should just go with the formula we established in the street fund discussion, that 56% of the purpose of the city budget is to repair old things and 44% is to address equity issues.
Or the other way around, Commissioner. So I very much appreciate this analysis and indeed analysis throughout the budget process. I can't remember how we used to do it before the city budget office existed, and I certainly appreciate the way it's done, and I support your analysis, except for the replacement of the budget software. Part of what, I mean, we spend 6 months of the year doing the budget, and part of the current system is that it's readily available to citizens, and I would think that the Bureau staff who have to input their budget stuff would be very unhappy if it had to be all done by spreadsheets, and your staff would be overburdened. It's hard enough as it is. So I think we should look at, I mean, it would be overhead funded. It could be overhead funded, right?
It would, if it went through our office, yes, the portion would be overhead funded. So of that, and I think the request actually reflects that of the $1 million, and that $1 million is extremely low confidence. So if the reporters who are watching know that is at this point, just we have called some vendors to get a rough estimate, but that is the extent we've taken on it.
That is the low end of the range, I would say.
Yeah, but again, the general fund would be $463,000, and the other revenues are $536, and those other revenues come from water, sewer, PBOT, et cetera, which again is a cost burden for them. So.
It is, and as I mentioned earlier today, I'm very reluctant to continue to add more and more costs that are shared throughout the bureaus. On the other hand, I believe this one is a really important one.
Related to that, have you evaluated open source budget software?
No, we haven't formally. We certainly would, if we got approval to move forward with the project, we'd put out an RFP, and before doing an RFP, would look at sort of all the options.
Right. You'd still have lots of implementation costs, I'm sure, but you'd avoid the license fees. Yeah. And what operating system does the software rely on?
Yeah, right, the Windows operating system?
Yeah.
Right now, well, that's why we're out of compliance right now. We're currently operating on Windows 7, but the software platform is not made for Windows 7. So what we did is we went to the vendor and said, will you upgrade the system? And they said no. So we tried it anyway, and it works. And that's why we're in that. If there's anything that changes, the system could just kind of shut down.
And have you tried it on Windows 8?
We haven't tried it on Windows 8 yet.
Your real risk is when you're no longer willing to run the operating system that the software depends on, right? So,
right.
So
yeah, we have no idea what will happen when we go to Windows 8.
Right. So you might try installing it and see what happens. That would help gauge the risk.
Windows 7 is going to be supported by Microsoft through 2019. I'm just saying. You have some time. We use Windows 7 at PSU, and we have no plans to move to Windows 8 anytime soon. I think you've got some distance there. The question is whether or not Microsoft's going to introduce a patch in the next 5 years or 4 years that's going to break the software that you use. So I hope that when you guys do your operating system upgrades, you are ready to do a rollback if necessary. And that also has consequences potentially because it leaves your systems at risk if you're not patching, et cetera, et cetera. And I know you guys have all.
We've even had server patches. We had a server patch a few months ago that actually shut down the system. I mean, we got in contact with BTS and they reversed what they had done and fixed it, but there are those things that could shut it down at any point.
Andrew, can I just ask you a kind of structural question? When we created the Independent Budget Office, one of the guiding principles was we wanted more transparency. And my sense in the last, to echo what Commissioner Fritz said earlier, my sense is that the council as a whole is getting better, more timely, more transparent information about the budget process. about numbers and options. So I think my sense is that's working. A second goal, though, over the last few years was to kind of establish some creative tension and checks and balances within the city. So we have an independent budget office. We have what I'll call a quasi-independent CFO. We have the budget committee of the council that operates, and there's meant to be checks and balances and a little bit of tension within the system. How's that working?
Well, yeah, no, there's always tension. I think it's working well. One of the challenges of a budget office anywhere, and this is really at any level of government, is to effectively balance that. One of our jobs is to ask questions that sometimes bureaus don't like, and sometimes, frankly, those questions can be obnoxious, and I understand that. The goal is to ask those questions up front, so that the bureau is able to either respond and in a convincing way, or sometimes change those packages to make them stronger. So before they get funded, before they go out. And I think that's the value added from having that independent process. But we still need to maintain the relationships with the bureaus, that even when we're asking them very difficult questions or really just we're adding to their administrative burden because they have to answer them, doing so in a way that we still maintain good relations. And I think for the most part we've done that. It'd be a good question to ask others as well. I do think the customer service rating, we're at 4 this last year, 4.09, out of 5, which is good, and we're hoping to get better than that. But I think that's good, and that is a combination of council and bureau rankings. I will say council is higher than that. Bureaus are a little lower.
Any other questions? Party shots? Thank you, David, for walking us through this process.
One more on Thursday.
Next on Thursday.
And just transportation and the utilities, so not a whole lot of money on the
Zero
table.
was an operating system that was